Hello. So thank you for joining me here. I'll just sort the camera out a bit. That should be okay. And so give a bit of time for people to come and jump in. If you're new here, feel free to subscribe if you find what I do interesting. Most of what I do on my channel is sleep meditations nowadays, but I do have lots of stuff on things like autism and mental health on my channel. From all the years that's what my channel was focused specifically on. Um, if you find this specifically interesting, then feel free to give a thumbs up. And what I'll be doing today, what was discussed and what I've been doing, is reading a section of my book, my autobiography, Look Into My Eyes, and then using that as kind of the basis for starting discussion and looking at what people want to talk about. So today I'll be reading a bit about my teenage years, and yesterday I read some about when I was a child, primary school age child, between about 5 and 10 years old, and I read a bit for sort of 15 minutes, had a look at to see what was in the live chat over that 15 minutes, responded to some of the questions, and if you wanted me to, I then read a bit more, and I kept doing that. And actually, you'd wanted me to keep reading enough that I actually finished the entire section on being a primary school aged child. I doubt that I'll finish the entire section on being a teenager, but hopefully some of it will spark some thoughts, maybe be helpful. So for those who don't know, a bit of my background is that as well as being autistic, I have spent most of my adult life working within the field of family therapy type stuff, social care work, from working in children's homes back in the early 2000s, helping to set up a therapeutic children's home in the early 2000s, and then progressing on to working in family support, initially around helping to reduce youth offending and antisocial behaviour. And part of that obviously also came in with trying to make sure kids were back in school where they were skipping school. And obviously part of the antisocial behaviour side would be that if kids are being excluded all the time, then that's obviously not going to be helpful for them and for their behavior. So I did that kind of work, and then I moved into managing and I sort of managed a team doing that as well. And then I progressed into managing a team of intensive family workers at a social care level. And I also had my own caseload. And our role was to turn around what the government had identified as being in the top 1% most challenging families in the United Kingdom. And so the idea was that we had to get involved and turn around whatever the issues are for the entire family. So we'd work with the parents, the children, we'd make sure that people who had mental health needs had those addressed. We made sure that people who needed diagnosis of one thing or another had that. We made sure that parents were in work where it was appropriate, children were in school, that as far as possible, people weren't on benefits unless it was relevant for them to be. So they were claiming the benefits that were relevant, but weren't on benefits that they could, for example, go to work to not have to have those benefits. So it was essentially around trying to obviously reduce antisocial behaviour, youth offending, so how the government identified these families was that these were the families that had the highest levels of public money being spent on them to try to sort of manage what was coming out of that family every year. So that's kind of my background there, and I'm significantly more skilled and experienced within things like family support work type stuff than I am in things like hypnosis, which I'm better known for. So I'm far more, if I was to say I was proud of something and had my arm twisted behind my back to force me to say I was actually proud of something, I'd probably say I'm far more proud of what I've contributed to and to what I've achieved within family therapy type stuff than what I've done within something like hypnosis, especially around things like child to parent violence and domestic abuse and things like that. Um, and helping, obviously, around autism awareness and advocating for predominantly autistic young people, and helping them to make sure that they're getting treated fairly and with respect and as human beings, and having the best start in life. So that's a waffling bit about anyone who doesn't know who I am or why I'm bothering to be kind of talking about all this. Good evening. So, like yesterday, I'll read a section of my book, looking at the secondary years now, and all my books are available, obviously, on places like Amazon and other bookshops. They're available as ebooks. They're available in print. I know that different Amazon websites, depending on things like accessing distribution, might list things as out of stock or might list things as dispatched in a few days or whatever. But they are able to be got from different sites. And in the description, I think, of all of these videos, I currently have my working with autistic clients e-course on a special offer, on like a spring offer for 30 days. And there's still about 20 days of that left. So anyone who's interested in that can find out more by clicking the link in the description. I've only got a water today. I've already had a coffee. For anyone who was here yesterday and saw me trying to keep on sneaking some of my coffee as it got colder and colder. So, my secondary school years from 11 to 16 were a time of inner discovery and deeper understanding about myself. I'd been interested in science before I started secondary school, but the term science had never been mentioned in either of the primary schools I attended. It wasn't until I started secondary school that I had the opportunity to learn what science was and to talk with others, mainly the teachers, about science. I was already on the back foot right from the first day in secondary school. I was the only child from my primary school going to the secondary school that I was starting. I remember my first day. I remember how large the school was, how daunting it was to see all of these children and have all the confusion. Everything seemed so chaotic. Most of the children seemed to know each other already. They were laughing and playing with each other, and were all being told where we had to go. There we were introduced to our new form tutor, who we had to follow to our classroom. There was one child destined to be in my class who was also stood on his own quietly. He looked nervous and overwhelmed. He was dressed in scruffy clothes and looked dirty, which I remember at the time seemed unusual for a child on their first day of school. I slowly moved over to him. I didn't talk to him, and initially he didn't talk to me. We walked into our new class, and I sat at the same table as him. Secondary school was such an overwhelming experience. I struggled with many aspects of being in such a large school. It was as if someone had created an environment designed to cause as much anxiety as possible. In primary school, there were only a few teachers, and classes were small. In secondary school, classes were larger, the children were noisier, and you didn't just have one teacher to spend time with all day, every day. You had many teachers and had lessons in many different classrooms, spread out over the large school grounds. Every morning started in the same classroom with our form tutor for registration. Some mornings we had assembly too. I used to dislike assembly. It was so crowded and I never knew what I was supposed to say or do, which just increased my anxiety. Following registration, I had to find my way to the first lesson. We had about 5 minutes to get there, and about 5 minutes between each class to get to the next lesson. unless there was a break time. Something about how my brain works makes this process very difficult. It sounds simple enough, for sure. The bell goes, you leave the class, and you walk to the next lesson. But in reality, I seem to have a poor ability for remembering or recognizing where I need to go. I wouldn't describe it as poor spatial awareness. I can do the spatial awareness puzzles where you're shown a picture of a shape and you're asked to choose which of the answers is the same shape but from a different angle. I can usually get these fairly quickly. I can look at a map, orient it in my mind, or just turn the map and navigate well from maps. But I can't seem to work out where to go in the real world. This was an issue in a large school where I had to find my way from one class to another with a time limit. I think I always succeeded, but I remember finding it very stressful. It didn't matter how many times I walked a route or how much I had been around the school. I'd still struggled to find my way around. It used to cause me so much anxiety. When I was put on the spot, I'd try to make any excuse to get out of the situation. If I was told to take something to another teacher or classroom, or if the room a lesson was normally in was changed, I'd start to panic and have to focus on calming myself down. I didn't want people to see me panicking in case they asked me if I was all right or tried to talk to me. At these times, I wanted the panic to calm down. I wanted to focus inwardly on breathing and relaxing and not have this just around the corner, whether it's having to join in different sports in PE or different events happening throughout the year or just a change of teacher or class. I like structure. I like being told what to do and how I'm supposed to act. I like having structure that doesn't change. I'm aware any new situation initially takes some time to get used to, and it's normal for most people to feel uncomfortable in new situations. But some types of situations I never seem to get used to. I'd rather go to school and have all my lessons in one class, or at worst, have all the lessons in a few classrooms next to each other. In all the years I attended secondary school, I never got used to where to go to lessons, even though for some subjects I may attend a specific classroom 3 or 4 times a week. When change occurred at school, I'd struggle with my very black and white thinking about things. I was happy just not to do something if it made me uncomfortable, regardless of the consequences. In fact, I wouldn't even consider the consequences. I would just do what would make me feel most comfortable. I'd fight this situation where I felt I was supposed to do something for a good reason, in the same way that most people who are nervous about public speaking will still do it if they feel it's the right thing to do, but they may not go out of their way to do it, and are very unlikely to volunteer to speak in public. The real question is, what is a good reason? What motivated me to keep control of myself and not just walk out of situations? I'd be curious about answers others would give to this question. For me, it definitely wasn't like I felt obliged to do something, or that I was doing something because someone would get upset if I didn't. I didn't care what others thought of me. What made me decide whether to do something or not was how important I felt it was to me. For example, back when I was young, computers hadn't really come into schools. It was pre Windows 95, so there was no clear operating systems. And each computer worked with different sized disks. Over my years in school, I've learnt a bit about computers, but it wasn't until business studies that we really had to use computers on a regular basis. I enjoyed some aspects of business studies, but didn't like having to use the computers. I was sure I would do something wrong that would break the one I was working on. I liked doing things with pen and paper. I liked doing business exercises. But for much of what I was learning, I couldn't see how it was going to be of any benefit to me at the time. I've always worked better by learning what I needed when I needed it. And when I decided to learn, when I needed it and when I decided to learn it. When I was approaching my GCSE exams, I told Mum that I didn't want to take the business studies exam and didn't want to do many of the other subjects I was learning. I wanted to just focus on English language, mathematics, and science. I didn't see that religious education, integrated humanities, business studies, French, physical education were going to be of any benefit to me. My focus at the time was on wanting to get the qualifications that employers wanted me to have. I was always told you need good grades in English, maths, and science. I loved learning and really wanted to go to university. Specifically, I wanted to study a science subject in university. But again, the focus was always on needing good qualifications in English, maths, and science. So to me, these were the lessons I needed to focus on. I wasn't good at mental arithmetic. I could understand maths and could work things out. I just couldn't do it in my head. In one of my first maths lessons in secondary school, we had to do something with times tables. I said I didn't know my times tables and asked if we could be taught them. The response I got was, if you don't know them by now, you never will. We don't teach that. You should have learnt that in primary school. It didn't seem to matter that I hadn't been taught times tables in primary school. Not the way I see it done on television, anyway, with people learning to recite them so that they know them off the top of their head. We'd been given the 100 squared grid to see the patterns, and we were given plastic work cards with different maths problems on, which were really easy to complete. I always used either my fingers or paper to work out the answers, so I never learned to do it in any other way. Once the teacher told me this, I knew there was never any point asking teachers for help, because they would only teach what they were told to teach, and wouldn't listen if someone said that they couldn't do something. They had a whole class to teach, and couldn't be teaching one person in the class one thing when everyone else in the class needed to be learning something else. This one experience stopped me from ever asking questions in class again if I felt I needed help. My black and white thinking often led to me making decisions like this. I now look back on them as I type, and I think about how stupid they were. Yet I know I'd make the same decision again if I was in the same situation, never mind how hard I would try not to do so. When I was young, I was very good at running. I wasn't the fastest runner. I know people who are competitive and so would win races, but I could run at an approximate 6-minute mile over any distance. I ran from 2-mile races up to 26 miles. At this distance, my time had slowed to almost 7 minutes per mile, though. My reason for running was because it was quicker than walking. I lived in the countryside, so if I wanted to get anywhere fast, I ran there. Because I was good at running, I was entered into the school road running competition representing my group. I told the teacher I didn't want to run in the race. He told me he knew I was good at running, so I was being entered. I explained that I had no interest in running around roads for no reason other than to beat the other children. I explained I wasn't happy to just run for the sake of running, and that if I was entered, I'd walk. Despite making all this clear, I was entered and I walked. I don't think people were happy with me. They would have done better to listen to me and enter someone competitive who would have run to try and win. In all my reports from the years when I was in secondary school, there are certain things that crop up from almost every teacher across all the years. They all say Daniel needs to speak up and contribute in class more, and Daniel needs to improve his concentration. From my reports, I come across as a very average child. The reports had 4 tick boxes for each heading about how I was doing in each lesson. I was always hovering in the middle 2 boxes. Teachers I didn't get on with at all would often mark me in the lower middle or bottom box, and teachers who I got on with better would usually tick the upper middle box. The exceptions were science and music, where I got on well with some of the teachers I had over the years. They gave me some ticks in the top boxes. When I first started at secondary school, I found it so difficult that I asked my mum if there was a way I could be kept back a year. I was an August child who was due in September, so I was aware that had I been born in September rather than August, I'd be in the year below. My thinking at the time was that the extra year may have given me time to grow up and be better able to handle secondary school. Unfortunately, I didn't manage to convince anyone to hold me back a year. I didn't like or dislike school. As with everything else in my life, there are things I like and things I don't like. But I don't feel that if someone had noticed how anxious I was about certain things and how much I struggled with some things, I may just check I read that right. Oh, but I do feel that if someone had noticed how anxious I was about certain things and how much I struggled with things, I may have got help and I may have been placed in a smaller class. I'd never heard about special needs. I assume from the work I've done as an adult that the school probably had classes for children who needed additional support and probably even provision for additional support for certain students in normal classes. Although as a child, I never saw signs of this. I think I was largely overlooked in my class. There were probably about 30 children in the class, and unfortunately, I seemed to share a class with a number of very disruptive students, whereas I was generally quiet. I wouldn't argue about things I thought weren't worth arguing about. I generally didn't like talking to people about things I wasn't interested in, so I wouldn't talk to other students, and wouldn't talk to teachers unless it was about something I wanted to talk about. This means I didn't chat or mess around in class. I didn't gossip. I generally kept myself to myself, regardless of what else was going on in the class. Obviously, like most children, I did occasionally join in things if it interested me to do so. If I had no interest in what a teacher was saying, and the child sat next to me was willing to talk about something I was more interested in, I'd happily talk to the child. If the child next to me was being studious and was engaging in the class which I had no interest in, then I didn't mess around to try and get attention. I was more than comfortable occupying myself. I would focus on my own thoughts or just listen to music and doodle on folders or books. I used to have a Walkman in my pocket with in ear headphones running up my school jumper, down my right sleeve, and into the palm of my hand. I worked out that teachers are more preoccupied with children towards the back of the class. Frequently, the poorly behaved children would sit back there, I assume, thinking that they could whisper to each other and misbehave without being noticed. But in reality, that's where the teacher spends most of their time focusing. I used to sit next to the overhead projector with the projector on my left side. That way, I could copy what was on the projector rather than wasting my time listening to a teacher. I would be leaning on my right hand, listening to music. And if the child sat next to me was also uninterested in what the teacher had to say, then I would have the left headphone running up their jumper and into their left hand and would let them copy what I was copying. This usually worked well because I'm left handed and people sat next to me were always right handed. I luckily never sat next to a left handed person who wanted to listen to music with me. For those younger people who are reading this or listening to me talk about this, um, the Walkman I had in my pocket was a huge device that played cassette tapes. It was noisy to start and stop, as it wasn't like modern MP3 players or even portable CD players. It had mechanical buttons which you had to press down, and they popped up noisily when the cassette tape stopped playing. If you wanted to skip forward or backward through the audio, you had to fast forward or rewind. You had to guess how far you needed to do that. And as cassette tapes are made of tape, it has to wind through the tape, which is also a noisy process. To listen to the other side of the tape, which may sound odd if you're very young, given that even CDs play everything on one side, you had to stop the Walkman playing, open it, take out the tape, put it back in with the opposite side facing towards the motorized spindles, so that in class you have to figure out how to do all of this quietly under the teacher's nose without drawing any attention to yourself. Overhead projectors were large box-shaped devices which were very bright lights in them, shining straight upwards and illuminating acetate transparent sheets onto which the teacher would have written work. Above the light box was a mirror which could be angled at the screen at the front of the class. Teachers would normally have most of the clear sheet covered with a sheet of paper and would pull the paper down little by little to reveal just the section they were teaching at the time, so that they may say the topic we were covering in the lesson. And then they told us they would slide the paper down to reveal a little of what would be projected on the screens. Something I always found interesting was how the light didn't project what was on the acetate through the paper. The paper would show as totally dark on the screen, yet if you looked at the light box, you could see what was on the acetate clearly through the paper. This meant you could copy what was written on the sheet if you looked at the light box, but you didn't know what was coming next if you were sat unable to see the top of the projector. This was also helpful for giving answers to questions the teacher would ask. Often they'd reveal a question while keeping the answer covered. They would ask the class the question and ask what the answer was. I never voluntarily put my hand up to answer questions, but if I was singled out and hadn't been paying attention, I would have already read the answer, so I would just say what the answer was from this. It was only when I went to secondary school that I had a Walkman. Prior to this, I could listen to cassette tapes or the radio at home on a hi fi system we had, and at my grandparents' home, I could listen to records. I used to love the feel of records. I remember as a child liking the weight of them, the texture, and the way the light reflected off it. We were never allowed to touch the face of the records. We were always told to handle them with care and only touch the edges. This meant the records had no fingerprints on them. They were clean and dust free. I loved the way the dark black would reflect light. They were also interesting to watch as they played. The record would just be a flat object with a continuous spiral groove running around from the outside of the record towards the middle of the record. At the time, I didn't know how records worked, but it fascinated me that a small spike resting in the groove led to reading a hidden message on the record, which then spoke or sung that hidden message. There was something I found relaxing about watching a record spinning as it played. I'll read a bit more in a minute. I'll just stop a minute. Let's see what people put. Coffee there. Possibly in regards to the visualizing numbers thing. But then I know a lot of people who, there's a lot of research about people who naturally do maths and about the way savants do maths, for example. And often it's not in numbers at all, it's in shapes. So visual imagery, but it's in like shapes or landscapes. It's often described as like a landscape, it just means a certain number. And as soon as two numbers are created together, like added together, multiplied together, divided, whatever, that instantly creates a kind of mental landscape, which I find very interesting. The idea of rather than it being about numbers, it's about landscapes. And a lot of people I know and I've read about who were savants at maths when they were young children, who then lost the ability, talk about how they had it drummed into them in primary school, the whole rote, you know, times tables and things like that, and were told they were doing it wrong because you've got to show you're working out in school, and there is no working out for a bizarre landscape in your mind. So they would talk about how just from years of forcing themselves to do things in the way that school says meant that they lost their innate maths ability, which I find quite interesting. Yeah, fortunately, I don't think any of our overhead projectors broke. Good thing is they're quite noisy. I don't know whether to take that as a compliment or not. Having a coffee to counteract my voice. Yeah, I keep pointing out I'm old. People keep saying I'm not. Yeah, I'm not going to start counting from 20 or 19 or 18 or 17 or 16 or any other number, not even 15, 14, 13, 12, 11, 10, 9, 8, or anything like that. Yeah, I have found it so much easier to self-teach or to learn from. I learn best just from watching someone do something. But yeah, self-teaching seems to work better for me, or figuring out who's teaching it in a way that seems to resonate with my brain. I've made more progress at learning piano in the last year. I haven't tried to learn piano over the whole year, but the times I've been doing stuff in the last year, I've made more progress than ever before in my life by just finding videos, YouTubers or whoever who seems to teach it in a way that resonates with my brain. That just makes me think, yeah, that actually makes a lot more sense. That's more about the rhythms first, because hence me having a drum and what have you, rhythm, and also the same with like how I do hypnosis and do storytelling and things. Rhythm is something that's very important to me. I can feel a rhythm. I can't necessarily just grasp something that feels like just a concept. Why would you get a pop-up asking if you want to block me? That's a bit weird. Um, there's a lot of weird pop-ups that people seem to be getting lately. The what people who are watching my videos and getting pop-ups to say, "Do you want to unsubscribe?" Okay, and cancel. Not even yes and no. So there are weird pop-ups and things. Yesterday, for whatever reason, YouTube hasn't been doing any purging, from what I understand from YouTube. But for whatever reason, yesterday I managed to, for the first time in probably nearly all the time I've been doing YouTube, I actually had a negative number of subscribers. Um, I ended the day something like minus 50 or something subscribers, minus 51 or something, um, which is the first time that's ever happened. Um, so yeah, it's very odd. But yeah, so hopefully, obviously, you don't want to block me. If you do, feel free, but hopefully you don't. Um, so I was just reading about Walkmen or Walkmans. I don't know what you'd call it. What's a Sony Walk? What's plural of Sony Walkmans? Walkmens? I don't know. Post-it notes. Yeah. Um, so when I got a Walkman, I was suddenly able to listen to music wherever I was. I wasn't that into music in the same way that my brothers and friends were. Most music sounded too chaotic or had too much singing. I found many songs overwhelming to try and keep track of and follow. As a younger child, I'd become interested in the music of Elvis Presley. Something about his music resonated with me. I preferred his slow ballads rather than faster songs like Hound Dog or Blue Suede Shoes. Slow songs are definitely more the pace of my mind. As an adult, I occasionally like faster songs, but even then, I prefer specific faster songs. Normally, a song which would somehow move me or make me want to move or matches what I'm trying to do. Like if I want to walk faster. Normally, I'd like very specific songs and would listen to those songs repeatedly. One day, I made an accidental discovery. I'd recorded some music from one tape to another over the top of music I had previously recorded. Unbeknown to me, where was I? Da, 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 da. At the time, the tape recorder was set to record in mono rather than stereo. I didn't realize this until I was listening to the tape through my Walkman, when I noticed that the original recording could be heard playing through one earpiece, and the new recording had only recorded over half the previous recording and could be heard playing through the other earpiece. This interested me. Suddenly, I had a way to listen to different music without having to change tape. I recorded a Michael Jackson album onto a tape in stereo and then recorded a Queen album over the top of the Michael Jackson album, recording it in mono. This allowed me to listen to both albums at the same time. Having said about not liking chaotic music and songs with too much singing, this may sound like I was creating my own problem, but to be aware of both in such a way as you can enjoy them, you had to let go and not be focusing on either. You had to learn to hover in the middle of the experience. When you're doing this, you also start to shut out the rest of the world. Not because you're trying to shut out the rest of the world, but because you're getting into a state of mind where you aren't specifically focusing on anything. You're just being mindful of the ongoing experience, almost allowing both ears to hear what is being played into that ear and enjoy its own music independently of the other. Focusing on either one would almost cancel out the other one. I've never been very good at narrowing my focus in that way by choice. I'm much better at detaching from things than I am at attaching to things. This has always been a problem when people talk to me in noisy or chaotic environments. I struggle to be able to cancel out everything but the person talking to me. I'm much better at being passive and zoning out and entering a more relaxed state where I don't feel so overwhelmed. I tend to just let someone talk as I listen, and often I find I've picked up more this way. However, my experience is that people then think I'm not listening, or they get frustrated with me. Yet when I try to focus on the person talking to me and keep saying I can't hear or understand them, they also get frustrated with me. Normally, as a teenager, I'd start out with a couple of albums which I would listen to repeatedly for a few weeks, 2 albums at a time. But eventually, I'd find I only really liked one song. I would then record just that song repeatedly onto both sides of the tape. If there are a few songs I liked, I would carefully record a song, turn the tape over, and record the same song. Then I'd turn the tape over, play the song I just recorded, and once it finished, I'd record the second song, turn the tape over, and record the second song again. Then, of course, I'd turn the tape over, play the song, and once it's finished, I'd record the third song, then turn the tape over and record the third song again. I'd keep doing this until I filled the tape on both sides, with each song in the same location on both sides of the tape. When I was about 14, I got a Walkman that had a reverse switch. This meant I could stop the tape, flick the switch, and then start the tape, and the Walkman would be playing the opposite side of the tape. I wouldn't have to remove the tape from the Walkman and physically turn it over. I was able to listen to a song, stop the tape, flick the switch to start the tape, and flick the switch, start the tape, and listen to the same song now playing on the other side of the tape. Something secondary school taught me was how much I actually enjoyed learning. I already knew I liked learning, but the learning opportunities I had in primary school were limited, and I rarely felt stimulated. Secondary school, meanwhile, taught me science. It went more into history than primary school did, and I enjoyed learning about geography and religious beliefs. There was so much more to learn. What I didn't like was the idea of having to learn just to do a test, or to learn and then do a project in some way, so as to show what I had learned. Ideally, I would have just attended the lessons to learn from and had the opportunity to ask teachers questions about the material I was learning. I didn't want to waste my time doing homework or coursework or tests. I just wanted to be taught. Occasionally, teachers would set homework in a way that allowed me to do things my way. If the work I had to do was to answer questions, I didn't care about it. I was unlikely to do it. It wouldn't interest me enough to waste my time on it. Some of my favourite projects include the World War II history project. I can't remember what we were told to do specifically, but I know the project was set in a way that essentially guided us towards writing an essay. Because of the wording, though, I realised I could do the project much more easily. I had no motivation to sit and write about World War II. So when I was at my grandparents' house and some of my older relatives were there, I asked if I could tape record interviews with them about their different experiences during the war. I did this over the space of about 40 minutes and submitted the tape as my coursework with a brief covering page explaining what I had done and what was on the tape. I got an A for my work, yet all I was doing was trying to make the task as simple and interesting as possible for myself. I was genuinely interested in what life was like during the war. I felt books showed pictures, but I wanted to know what it was like for real people who I knew. I found many teachers in my secondary school didn't understand me and weren't helpful at all. They wouldn't pick up that I needed help. But there was one teacher who stands out to me as someone who helped me immensely, and without some advice from her, I would never have I would have done far worse in school, and I wouldn't have written the books I've written, including this one you're reading now. During my first year in secondary school, we had a science project where we had to build a bridge out of spaghetti and cotton and then see how much weight our different bridges could hold. I built a suspension bridge. What we were told to do was to build a bridge out of the materials and then to write what we did. In the next lesson, we would test to see how much weight each bridge could hold. So I built the bridge and wrote, "I built a bridge out of cotton and spaghetti." Full stop. The teacher asked me if my parents had helped me make the bridge. I told her that they wouldn't have been clever enough to know how to make a suspension bridge. She didn't believe that I'd made the bridge because I had shown no evidence that I knew how to build one, or knowledge of why I would build that particular type of bridge. All I'd written was that I'd built a bridge out of cotton and spaghetti. I told the teacher why I'd built the bridge. I explained about the strength of suspension bridges given the materials we had, and about how the cotton was able to take a lot of the weight through the structure so that the bridge could hold more weight than a simple beam bridge could. Dry spaghetti placed horizontally across two upright spaghetti pillars was likely only to hold a certain amount of weight before it cracked, as dry spaghetti isn't very flexible. Cotton wrapped under the spaghetti from the uh, Cotton wrapped under the spaghetti from cotton above the spaghetti over to the other side and up to the cotton above the other side, and then wrapped back down under the spaghetti again and back to the other side, however, would allow the cotton to support the weight along the length and the width of the bridge. The teacher replied that what I had said was what she wanted written down, because it showed I had evaluated the task and understood what I'd had to achieve. I'd evaluated different bridge structures in relation to the task and given my reason for developing that specific bridge. And then I'd built it. I said the question didn't make that clear. It asked me what I did, not how or why I did it. She said that there would be lots of times in school when questions were written like that. Normally, they would want you to answer more fully. She said I should write down what I would say to someone if they asked me what I did and why, and just put everything down on paper. She told me I could always learn how to edit and make changes to the work. But if it wasn't written down in the first place, I wouldn't be showing evidence of what I knew. She said sometimes I may be told I've written too much, or in too much detail, or with some unnecessary information. But I could learn from being told that as I went through school. This advice was huge to me. It stood out straight away and had remained prominent in my mind ever since that day in 1989. I still naturally find myself being blunt and giving curt answers to things as my more default setting. That is, unless I want to share lots of information about a subject I enjoy, because I think someone else should also know about it. Often, that teacher's words come into my mind when I catch myself doing that, and I think about whether I've missed out information that the reader or listener would probably have wanted to know. I've also shared about an unhelpful maths teacher who just dismissed my comments about needing help. Most other teachers weren't that dismissive. They just didn't seem to notice I needed help. I don't know if this was more to do with a lack of understanding about problems children faced back then. Nowadays, I go into many schools, both primary and secondary. All of the teachers I speak to know about autism spectrum disorders. They speak to mental health practitioners for advice about children and whether the mental health practitioners think the child they're talking about has Asperger's. Whatever a child, whether a child has a condition or not, they look at how to meet the child's needs and whether there can be additional funding that can help that they can blah, blah, that they can have to help support the child. Unfortunately, funding is usually only available when a child has a diagnosis. Yet, I know many teachers who would like to be able to offer support to children who perhaps don't have a diagnosis. Sometimes teachers can find a way around this and get the support, but I don't remember any of this from when I was in school. Every school report of mine says the same thing from each different teacher. Allegedly, the reports were read by my form tutor and the head of the section we were in. Then the head or deputy head of the school signed each report and gave a comment about the student's progress. So, reading my reports, it looks like more senior staff had read them. But if they truly had been read before being signed, these more senior staff seemed to miss the patterns that were there for all to see. Whereas all the different teachers had said the same thing every year. I'll carry on in a minute. It's just about to get onto the lack of awareness about autism. But, just reading down the comments. Yeah, I rarely listened to the radio back when I was young, mainly because it's full of songs and not songs that I'm choosing to listen to. But I'm aware lots of people used to record songs off the radio. Always good to parent a pet. Out of the box thinking, good teachers appreciate it. You just have to find those good teachers. Normally, it's a case of that's not what's on my answer sheet. You need to do what you're supposed to do. Yep, the whole show your work thing is a bit of a nightmare, given that what would be better would be if someone evaluated you face to face and perhaps kind of spoke to you and asked you how you come up with whatever answers you come up with, and then that person who's evaluated you would know, Ellen comes up with it in this way. She just naturally finds the answer through this kind of mental process that she does. So that way, it doesn't need to have the show you're working, show how you worked it out on paper, because someone has personally evaluated that you know how to work these things out. It's now just a question of, can you do it consistently enough to pass a test, kind of thing. If someone, say a woman, felt that they had been undetected, felt they were autistic, first thing I would do is I've got a blog post on my site, danjoneshypnosis.com, about autism diagnosis, and I shared it here the other day. But if I can quickly click off of where I'm at and find it, I can then share the link again now. But on that post, it has links to the tests, sort of, which make up part of the diagnosing process. And so, what's helpful is to then, that's the post. What's helpful is to then take those tests. That would give you, or take the test for your age. That would then give you an idea of whether you would be likely to be diagnosed or receive a diagnosis if you went for a diagnosis. And it also tells you these are the traits of being autistic, so that you can then look at that as well. And What you need to do, though, if you are seeking diagnosis, is make sure that when you talk to your GP or doctor, you say, "This is my reason for thinking I could be autistic." And so it's very handy if you know enough about like autistic traits and things that you can say, "I think I could be autistic because, here's how I did on the online test, which is an official part of the way they do the diagnosing. And here are traits of mine that lead me to believe this." I think it is harder for women because even though I personally feel that autism is as prevalent in women as it is in men, um, there are aspects that it just seems to go kind of overlooked. There are aspects that, for example, I personally believe that the females I've met seem to get sensory overwhelm more from things like emotional stuff than males. That doesn't mean males don't, but it seems that's a bit more from females. But then because they're getting overwhelmed by emotional stuff, um, they end up seeming to be diagnosed with having like an anxiety problem or having whatever other problem instead of that being seen as a sign that they've got this hypersensitivity to emotions, for example. Um, and obviously, females generally mask a lot more than males. So that is that they generally seem to kind of behave more like, in ways to try and fit in more. And then that means that certain characteristics don't necessarily come out in people's minds when they're looking at diagnosing or when they're looking at referring for a diagnosis. So I think it's about kind of knowing that and then being able to be, when you're going for the referral in the first place, you're able to be open and honest and say, look, this is my inner world. This is what things are like for me. Even if on the outside I manage to force this composure or whatever during a day, this is kind of what it's like. So I think, but it's about knowing what to say and do, because if you don't say and do the right thing, people just don't take you seriously. I will share that link in just a moment, but I know that once I do, it's going to jump down to the bottom of the screen. So I'm just reading down to the bottom first. Yeah, there are many situations where the ways you're given to solve something aren't the ways you choose. Um, yeah, I've just sort of briefly mentioned about doing that, how I would, for example, talk endlessly to a teacher, say at the end of a class, because I'm really fascinated by the subject. Um, but there would be some classes I wouldn't put my hand up, I wouldn't talk, I wouldn't ask questions or do anything. Um, and I'm sure my teachers got annoyed, but I had no awareness of that, if that makes sense. I didn't have theory of mind enough to be able to see their perspective of the situation of what was going on. I would just assume that if I love talking about something, so does everyone else. And it would be very odd for someone not to, it wouldn't even cross my mind that they might not like talking about something. Um, right, let me share that link over there. We learned the other day that it seems only I can share links over in the live chat. So that's shared. Um, yeah, it's this lack of awareness that I think let me down in secondary school. So that's a lack of awareness of autism and, in fact, mental health and everything, I think, back in those days, um, where I may have needed extra help. I know Asperger's wasn't used as a diagnostic term until 1992, and then didn't make it into the DSM-4 until 1994. As I was leaving secondary school in 1995, it was just coming into use as a term and probably wasn't being taught widely to teachers until a couple of years later. I hadn't heard about autism until 1998 when I was working in mental health care homes, and hadn't heard about Asperger's until 2004 while I was working in children's homes. I didn't try to tell teachers that I couldn't do some things and couldn't understand some things. Oh no, I did try to tell teachers that I couldn't do some things and couldn't understand some things, but I would just get told to do them anyway. My school reports for each lesson say I must try harder to concentrate in class. I must do my homework. I must speed up my writing and put effort into writing more, and I must contribute more in class. When I left secondary school when I left school with GCSEs, I had double B for science, C for English language, C for mathematics. I had a couple of Ds, and all my other grades were Fs. Yet people have always told me that I'm intelligent. I've always been surprised at how well children do nowadays. Many families that I've worked with have children who barely attend school and yet leave with multiple A grades, often A stars. And yet I only managed a couple of Bs and a couple of Bs and Cs from all of my lessons. I've always believed I was capable of achieving more. I just didn't seem to fit. I just didn't seem to fit with exactly how school was done. I couldn't write quickly enough to finish exams. I wouldn't give all the information needed in essays because I wouldn't understand or know exactly what I was supposed to write. And I seemed totally incapable of doing things for which I couldn't understand a logical reason. I definitely would have benefited from a skilled, trained teacher who would work one-to-one with me, and from different settings for things like exams. Classes always had too many children in them. I felt most comfortable if I was in a small group of no more than 5 or 6 children, all of whom I got on with. If there were more than that, or if there were children who bullied me, I would close down from the group. I think this can be a problem nowadays. Often children who need additional support due to issues like being autistic get placed in the same group as children who misbehave or who are disruptive or who bully other children. When I started attending secondary school, I was still living in Warning Camp and had to catch a school bus to Littlehampton. The bus was the same bus I had to catch to my primary school in Arundel. It picked up children from Warning Camp and the surrounding area before heading into Arundel to drop children off at the 2 primary schools, and then it travelled on to Littlehampton to the secondary school. Within a few weeks of starting the school, I found out that another child in my class also came from the Warning Camp area. This gave me someone to travel to and from school with. Generally, I didn't have many friends. I've never been good at making and keeping friends, partly because I have no interest in making and keeping friends. My friends are very situational. It doesn't mean I don't like the people I've been friends with, or that I don't see those people as being friends, even now as an adult. I just think about friendship in a different way to how other people talk about friendship. When I was friends with the person who lived near me, I used to visit his home most evenings after school. We used to build go-karts and tree camps, death slides, swings, and would occasionally go camping in fields. If it wasn't the weather for doing those sorts of things, my friend had a Nintendo and we would play Duck Hunt, Mario, or track and field. Once we moved to Littlehampton, Mum felt we would then be closer to school and we'd be able to attend activities easier. Most clubs and activities took place in Littlehampton, whereas almost nothing took place in Warning Camp and very little took place in Arundel. Because of this, I stopped spending time with the friend from near where I lived. I even stopped spending time with him in school. I met a new boy who remained my main friend through most of the years I was in secondary school. He seemed to understand me better than most other children. He had a pool table in a building in his back garden, and he also had pool lessons. This was how I first learned what pool was, and I very quickly fell in love with the game and started attending coaching sessions. Most of the other children I spent time with at this time were friends of my friend. I got on with most of them all right, but I only engaged with them because that's what we were doing at that time. If my friend wanted to join in activities with them, then I joined in as well. Towards the end of my time in secondary school, I moved on to my third set of friends. Again, I latched onto the one friend. He had a Super Nintendo, which was the Nintendo console that came after the Nintendo. The good thing, at least back when I was a child, is that children who played computer games were often children who didn't mix much with other children. Nowadays, it's different. Playing computer games is more common among people. The games I would play, the games I would play, most weren't multiplayer. They would allow me to sit quietly with my friend, watching him play, and then maybe have a go after him, playing on my own. I generally didn't like multiplayer or competitive games, which is the same now. The only game I think I really enjoyed playing with others was as a young adult playing GoldenEye on Nintendo 64. This third set of friends enjoyed going to West Beach in Littlehampton to play Manhunt. Manhunt has always been a favourite game because it involves hiding, sneaking, practicing and developing skills, whether it be tracking, finding and catching people, or hiding, sneaking and avoiding capture. We used to also build camps on the beach and would often play at night. Sometimes I'd convince my friends to travel to Warning Camp with me to play games like Manhunt in the Woods. I also attended the local youth club a couple of times per week with these friends. At the youth club, there were always children I wanted to avoid because they'd want to pick on me, and I preferred not being picked on. But the youth club did a wide range of activities I enjoyed. They had a Sega Mega Drive, which was often in use and difficult to get on, but I didn't own one, so would enjoy playing it when the opportunity arose. They also did trampolining. I liked the feeling of weightlessness between bounces, and I tried to jump as high as I could and hold on to that feeling for as long as possible. They did rifle shooting, where we got to shoot targets, or McDonald's Happy Meal figures, lined up at the end of the hall. They also had an indoor basketball court. I wasn't very good at basketball as a game. I struggled with so much going on and trying to keep track of people and the ball. But I loved the weight, smell, and feel of the basketball, and the feel of it when it was thrown, and the noise it made as it bounced. My favourite part of the noise was the silence between the sound of the ball hitting the ground and the sound of the ball as it reached my hands again. I enjoyed throwing the ball into the hoop. I could happily stand on the same spot for hours on end just throwing it in. One thing I always wanted to do was to slam dunk the basketball. I was a short child, but I learnt that I practiced jumping higher by crouching all the way down to the floor and then pushing all the way up and jumping off the ground, and then lowering all the way back down again and repeating this. I practiced many hours a day for months until eventually I could stand below a basketball hoop and jump up off the ground and just about reach the rim. I was very good at practicing things for hours at a time, day after day, if I wanted to learn it badly. I practiced holding a playing card, the wrong chosen card, and then flicking it and having the card in my hand now being the correct card. I practiced in front of a mirror, trying to move different facial muscles because I wanted to be able to show different facial expressions realistically, following learning about the difference between a real smile and a fake smile. I wanted my smile to appear more real. I went through a stage where I was fascinated with ventriloquism. I loved how impressive it was that a ventriloquist could talk so fluently and normally without moving the lips. So I wanted to stand in front of a mirror. So I'd stand in front of a mirror for hours talking with my mouth closed. Likewise, when I started learning to play pool, I practiced for about 30 hours a week. As soon as I was interested in something, I'd become obsessed with it and would assume that if I was obsessed with it, then everyone else must be as well. It's weird to think that people don't love what I love as much as me, but I keep being told that they don't. I'd want to know every detail about the subject. I'd want every book I could get about it. I'd want to have everything connected to that subject. It had also become my main focus of attention and conversation. I never seemed to stop being interested in something, but over time, circumstances would make certain interests less intense, or I just reach a point where there didn't seem to be as much new information to learn. I kept a lookout for anything new, but didn't spend all of my time focusing on that one thing. Even now, I also occasionally discover something new that interests me more. So I'll continue to be interested in the other subjects, but prefer to focus on the subject that interests me most. When I left school, it didn't cross my mind to keep in touch with friends that I'd made in school. I moved forward with my life without giving any thought to those I knew. When I've seen those friends since school, I still treat them as friends and they treat me as a friend. And the conversation normally ends with them saying we should meet up sometime or a similar kind of comment, and me agreeing. Then nothing happens, we just carry on with our lives. Socially, I never really knew how I was supposed to behave in school. I didn't know or think about how I didn't know how to behave socially. I behaved in my own way, thinking that it was normal. Occasionally, other children would try to bully me, but many ways in which they would try to bully didn't register with me. I didn't really understand name calling, other than it would annoy me that they were incorrect in what they were saying. If they tried to be funny, I often wouldn't understand them. If they acted angrily, I didn't get intimidated because I didn't understand why I should be scared. They would just be saying words. They weren't doing anything to be scared of. If they became violent towards me and perhaps pushed me over, I didn't understand how I was supposed to react. I would just stand up and walk away. I didn't get scared by someone attacking me. I obviously didn't want to be hurt, so I would avoid situations where I thought someone may hurt me. But if someone was attacking me, I couldn't avoid it. All I could do was wait for them to finish what they were doing so that I can carry on with my day. I remember once being attacked by a bully. They had some friends around them who were encouraging them to attack me. I don't think they needed the extra encouragement though. They decided already that they were going to attack me. The bully pushed me over onto the playing field. I stood up and carried on walking. I didn't say anything because I didn't have anything to say. They pushed me over a few more times, and each time I just stood up and carried on walking. After a while, the bully said they couldn't. Uh, the bully said they could deck me if they wanted, before turning to the others and saying something like, "Let's go and do something else." I think they got bored of getting no reaction. Bullies usually want to bully someone they're confident that they'll be able to beat up, but they do still want to show their power or status and want the person they're bullying either to be scared and cower or to try to fight. By giving no reaction, not responding with fear or anger, I was a boring target. I wasn't always passive, but it depended on the situation. I was never angry or fearful in situations like this unless it was needed because I knew what I was doing. I've always got anxious and I have got I have always got anxious and blunt in situations where I feel like I'm drowning in uncertainty. But if someone pushed me over, I knew I was going to just walk away. I had no interest in what they were doing, so I wouldn't stay. But likewise, I wasn't going to run unless I felt I was going to get hurt, and running would be the best available option. If I was very likely to get hurt and running wasn't an available option, then I would do whatever I had to do to give myself the best chance of getting out of the situation as safely as possible. Because I knew this was how I would react, I didn't have a reason to be fearful or angry unless it was needed to help me do what I had to do to maintain my safety. In one situation, a child much larger than me, who often bullied other children, stole a chocolate bar from me whilst I was walking home. I was a much faster runner than he was, so I easily caught up with him. I calmly got him, I pinned him to the ground where I caught up with him, which happened to be in the middle of a main road. I calmly and bluntly told him I wanted my dairy milk chocolate bar back. He was telling me I was crazy as cars were driving around at us and beeping at us. I wasn't focused at all on the cars. I was focused on the fact that he had taken my chocolate bar and I wanted it back. It belonged to me and I was about to eat it on my way home. It didn't take long for him to return it. I had no concern for whether I could get run over or injured. It was solely a matter of principle. I always tell myself I'm never rude to people. I just I'm just open and honest. But I'll read that in a minute, possibly. We'll see what it says up here. Just reading about your mum. Yeah, one of the things in relation to bullying, it's obviously something a lot of families I work with or have worked with have encountered, sort of bullying issues and how to handle it. And obviously, it's very easy to say, don't react. But obviously, that's a very hard thing to do if you're someone that gets wound up when you're being pushed around, or is terrified when you're being bullied or whatever. And it's probably different nowadays, obviously, to when I was in school, because there's social media, there's all sorts of things that go on that make it like it can be a permanent part of your life, even when you're out of school. Whereas obviously when I was in school, you didn't have mobile phones and things. If you were bullied in one environment, when you left that environment, you didn't have the bullying leave with you. It didn't kind of carry on everywhere. Um, I don't think so. I don't think it crossed my mind in the slightest to tell anyone about it, because I didn't. Again, one of my issues I've always had is the ability to kind of step outside myself, and I spoke about this on the radio the other day when I was on BBC Radio, in relation to the current kind of lockdown, about the fact that it just doesn't cross my mind to think about necessarily kind of telling other people, or thinking, I don't know how to describe it. I don't get it. I don't kind of think about going in other people's heads and thinking, oh, they would want me to tell them, or I just think about myself and being in the moment. And so rarely think, oh, that's something I could have asked for advice for. In fact, normally it's other people who say, oh, you could have come to me, I would have helped. And I would think, oh, I didn't even think of that. So it's not necessarily, I don't want to or anything like it. I just genuinely, it never even crosses my mind. Um, and so at school, it definitely never ever crossed my mind to go and ask for help. To go and say, this is what's happening. If someone asked me, I was always honest and blunt. And that's just, if someone said, are they bullying you? Yes, that's what's happening, is going on. And I'd just be honest and blunt about it. But I wouldn't go out of my way to tell people, because it wouldn't even cross my mind to go out of my way to tell people. An example I probably won't end up reading, because I don't think I've got it written down for any of these days to cover, which is when so in here I talk about being an adult as well, because I happen to have become an adult. And as being an adult, I did a job, and a year into the job I got hit by a truck and put in hospital. While I was in hospital, a year into my job, um, my work colleagues came to visit me in hospital, and Abby came to visit me in hospital. Abby said, hi, I'm Abby, Dan's girlfriend. And my work colleagues said who they were and said they didn't even know I had a girlfriend. And Abby was a bit annoyed that I'd managed to work with a team of staff for an entire year, and it had never come up that I had a girlfriend at home and that we're engaged or anything like. None of that came up. But it never came up because no one ever asked me, and it didn't even cross my mind that it's the sort of thing that you would tell someone, because who's going to care? Who's going to care that I have a relationship? It's not of any interest to anyone. It's interest to me. Now I make a point of trying to make sure that it's mentioned and that people know. Um, but only because of my experience of suddenly having Abby annoyed that there was me doing a job for a year and seeing staff about 45 hours a week for an entire year and not once divulging that I've got a girlfriend at home, who I live with and what have you. So certain things just don't cross my mind, like kind of what people might want to know or what I should tell people and things like that. Um, I have to go out of my way to have a mistake, have something happen where there's some consequences that make me think, oh, I suppose I better try and avoid that happening again then. So now if I start jobs, I probably won't start any future jobs as long as I can remain self-employed, unless they offer me something good. Um, but if I started jobs, I would, ever since that incident, I would always go out of my way to kind of say, um, I'm Dan. I have a wife. Her name is Abby. I live in such. I just almost list everything as if I'm kind of have been told. Say everything about yourself here and now, and I just tell everyone everything on day one, so that they know everything about me. I used to start jobs, and on day one, I would tell my manager and I tell staff, um, "This is who I am. This is how I am. This is how I'm going to really annoy you. This is how I'm going to probably be rude to you. I'm probably going to make you cry, make you upset, um, as my manager or whatever." Um, I have had two managers now, I think, who haven't cried, but largely managers end up crying. Um, and yeah, so I just try and tell everyone and tell my own staff and everything, this is what I'm like. Pull me up on this if I do this sort of behavior because I won't know that I'm doing it. It will happen automatically and instinctively. Um, but yeah, so definitely didn't cross my mind to talk to someone about being bullied. Um, in fact, for all I know, the first time that my mum or whatever might have found out was from reading my book. I know she's read the book, as has before my granddad died. He'd read the book as well, and I remember him saying that he was quite sort of um, shocked about some of it. I don't think he was so happy that I was so blunt about putting this personal stuff out there. Um, I think he liked the idea of it all being kept kind of, oh no, you don't tell people things personal about yourself. Whereas for me, it was a case of it's likely to be more helpful to people if I am personal about it and just and very open about it. It would be a lot thinner if I cut out all the stuff that's personal. So, hello, Sharon. What was I on? Yeah. So, but I remember people. Any feedback from my mum? Not really. When I went for my, obviously, I was diagnosed as being autistic as an adult, and as part of the process, you have to take your parent with you to the assessment. If your parent's around, if your parent isn't around, or a significant carer who's been around for your whole life isn't around, then it's a bit harder to do the assessment, and you have to go through hoops of them trying to say, right, you've got to somehow evidence that you've been the way you've been since birth, and it can't just be that you say, I believe I've been that way since birth. So you end up having to find other ways of somehow proving that, like, do you have a doctor who was around at the time, or records from a doctor who might be able to corroborate the early years stuff. um, so I remember saying to mum, I'm going for an autism diagnosis. You're going to have to attend with me. And she was very kind of, oh my God, maybe it's just a vitamin deficiency. Maybe there's, um, something, a dietary thing that just needs changing. And Um, she was kind of trying to think of any way that it can't be autism. And then, obviously, once I was diagnosed, um, nope, nope. My next brother down isn't the type that normally reads. I've got three younger brothers. In fact, one of them has read my autobiography, I think, my youngest brother, but one's dyslexic and doesn't really read, and the other one just doesn't really read. And the youngest one, who has read it, doesn't read hugely, but I think he's read it because it's me and it's my book. He's read my hypnosis books as well. But yeah, so initially, mum went through a stage of denial of it can't be autism, it can't be autism, and even in the assessment was saying to the psychologist, I don't think Dan's autistic. He can't be autistic. I've always called him my little scientist. He's been so clever since the age of like 2. He was talking. He was far brighter than anyone we ever had babysit or anything, and he was far more capable. And on his first day of nursery school, he just walked straight in. He didn't turn around. He didn't look back. He didn't cry. He didn't hug me. He didn't need. He was so secure in himself that he just walked straight in as like a 3-year-old or whatever it was. Walked straight in without any problem at all. None of my other kids did that. He can't be autistic. He's far too secure and sensible for that. And the psychologist said, given that you've got 4 children and the other 3 never behaved like that, how likely do you think it is that that's normal, typical behavior of a child when what you're describing is a description of an autistic child? And that was kind of the first time that mum was faced with the fact that I could be autistic. And it was coming straight from the psychologist, not from me saying this. It was from the psychologist responding to what she was saying she was saying it to try and disprove the theory that I could be autistic. And the more she said, the more it was backing up what the psychologist was saying. That is evidence. And now she's kind of okay with it, and we've had conversations. I haven't. It doesn't even cross my mind to say, "What do you think of my book?" So I haven't asked her specifically what she thinks of the book. I think she might have done a review. I don't know. I don't really read the reviews often. Every now and then, if I stumble on them when I'm sort of seeing how my book's doing, I might see a review, but I don't normally look at them. But yeah, we have talked about me being autistic, and we've talked broader now about like who else in the family seems to have traits like they possibly could have been, diagnosed as autistic in their youths. Because I do have certain family members, like my granddad, who very clearly seem to show traits like, obsession around very limited subjects that they followed literally for their entire lives, and pretty much ran their lives around those obsessions. Lack of a social circle, of kind of being able to socialize and having relevant social skills, but being able to learn. So in my family, at least, being reasonably intellectual in terms of being able to learn how you're supposed to behave in different situations, and then behaving in those very rigid kind of ways, in the same way that I imagine, if you train to be a lawyer or something, you're going to learn very specific behavioral ways of how you present as a lawyer when you're, say, in court or something. And so my granddad was good at that kind of thing, that he clearly had learned how to present in certain ways, but he wasn't someone that if you threw him into a party would know how to socialize, other than he would suddenly go on rambling about stories. Someone would get him on something and it would be a one-sided conversation. He would tell a story and then that would be the end. And then eventually something might happen where he ends up telling another story, where someone would say to him, "Oh, Reg, what was that thing you told me the other day?" And then he would tell another story. But there wasn't that kind of two-way conversation thing that he would have. Yeah, I kind of thought 2 things. One was that mum would have, because I had told mum that after dad had died, I told mum I found documents that prove that dad thought that I had certain traits that he wanted checked out. Um, like he commented on the fact that I didn't seem to know how to play. I seemed to be able to sit next to my brother and do things on my own, but I didn't seem to know how I'm supposed to play properly. He talked about how I didn't seem to know how to say please. Even though my younger brother had learned it already, I didn't seem to be grasping how to say please and thank you and things like that um, correctly, and how to interact in these different ways. Um, he'd said that he wouldn't call me clumsy, but for some reason I don't seem to know where my body is in space. I seem to bash into things, whatever. I seem to have balance and everything, but I seem to still bash in and not quite know where I am, um, and kind of not know where my body parts are, so to speak. So he, in his own words, he tried to explain what he was observing, and I could see that he was describing an autistic child through his descriptions. And so I had told mum that. So there was an element of, if it turned out to be true, that means that my dad, who obviously mum and dad didn't end on very good terms, had spotted things. And it was my granddad, as I said previously, it was my granddad and my mum, what have you, who stopped me being seen when dad had reported it and tried to get me seen because he wanted a psychologist to see me. So there would be an element of possible guilt, and then there was an element of, I think, lack of understanding, and so guilt that maybe it's she's somehow to blame for me being autistic, as if somehow she has caused it through some action of hers or something. And so obviously I had explained, it's not, if I'm autistic, it's not because of an action you've taken. It's not that, you know, you treated me a certain way as a child and that's caused me to be autistic or anything like that, because that's not how autism is caused. So I think she just needed some level of having things explained to her and understanding before she could move on to acceptance and realizing, actually, it's not the end of the world that my son's autistic. He is getting diagnosed as an adult, having managed to make it to being an adult. I'm the one who she has always said is the one most academic and the one most likely to, sort of achieve some kind of um, qualifications if I ever set my mind to doing it or whatever. Um, so yeah, so I think she just needed some time. But obviously, if you're suddenly telling your parent, you know, I think I could be autistic, and you've got to come along with me, and they know nothing. It's not a field they've worked in or anything, so they don't know anything really. They just hear the word autism, and there is an element of, when you hear the word autism, people instantly thinking of someone who perhaps has uh, say various other problems as well as being autistic, say around intellect or certain other issues that can happen with autism. So yeah, but it's better to have been diagnosed and to have been open. And it was good that my mum came to the appointment. I think if she hadn't come to the appointment and didn't engage in the process, I think that would have made it more difficult, because then it would be me telling her I'm autistic and her constantly telling me maybe they've misdiagnosed you, maybe this, maybe that. And she did do some of that, but having a psychologist being the one that tells her um, means that it's not just me sort of being the one doing it. But yeah, people can have obviously fears that you've got in one environment, and then if it doesn't crop up in most of your life, you don't really notice it until something happens potentially much later on. Obviously, if someone came to me saying they had got a fear of escalators and it just hadn't come out until later on, because you hadn't encountered escalators for years, then I would kind of want to just deal with where that fear came from. Yeah, I think that's the image that people have when they first think of autism. Um, and obviously, stimming is an interesting one because I talk about in this book. I try one thing I try and do in everything I do is I try to avoid language that doesn't mean anything necessarily to whoever's reading it. So the same in therapy. I try not to use therapy jargon when working with people because they don't need to know the therapy jargon. They're a client. They're not a therapist who's learning therapy. Um, they shouldn't have to learn jargon to get treatment. Um, so anything I do, if I can, I avoid using jargon. And so there are things like stroking that I would do as a sort of stimming type of activity. I've talked before about clicking pens that I would do if I had a pen to click or something. Tapping is definitely one that I would do a lot of. Um, but I know that there are things that I didn't do that are quite common among autistic people, like flapping hands and things like that. And so some of those are definitely far more kind of visible and things that if someone's doing it, it stands out. I fortunately never hit my head against a wall or anything either, um, not as a stimming thing. Um, so as a child, I obviously hit my head against walls accidentally, but never as an on purpose thing. Um, but yeah, so there is that element of people have this image of what an autistic person looks like, and they assume that every autistic person must have been that image they've got in their head, even though that's not the case. And I think that's probably something else that was getting mum. In fact, that was one of the differences between whether you used to get a diagnosis in prior to everything changing and it just being autism spectrum disorder. Um, the difference between whether you would get a diagnosis of high functioning autism or Asperger's was how you were in those first couple of years of your life. If you were, say, nonverbal, or perhaps you had regressive behaviors, so you appeared like you were developing normally, but then you suddenly had a dip in how you're developing and maybe regressed a bit, then you were normally diagnosed as high functioning autism. That's assuming if sort of at the time you're higher functioning, so to speak. You know, you've got an average or above average IQ. That's all higher functioning is, um, in terms of with autism. And for Asperger's, it was a case of as the higher functioning part, you're the same here and now, but as the child, sort of in very early years, you were average or above average in intelligence, in speech and language and things like that as a child. So that kind of was the kind of differing bit of which one of those two you get diagnosed with. Um, Generally, obviously, professionals don't talk about high functioning and low functioning because that part has nothing to do with the autism itself. It's to do with things like learning difficulties and things that can go with that person's diagnosis. Um, and whereas in terms of actual problems people can present with or experience, challenges and things, you could have times that you're non-verbal, however you're classed as being autistic. You can have times where you just shut down and you just don't talk to people, you close off from the world. Um, Maybe certain situations, maybe around certain types of people, whatever it happens to be. You can have times um, where your brain just shuts down and stops being able to function like intellectually. Um, so generally, professionals won't talk about people being high functioning or low functioning. Sometimes, in terms of when you're talking to the press, they might mention it to try and make it easy because the public kind of have a rough idea of what they think you mean, even though professionals would think something different. Um, I went out with a number of girls in school. I might end up talking about it in just a minute. Um, and I think I wrote here about the first girl who I ended up asking out myself. Um, but yeah, most people didn't really have much clue back then. And as I say, really, the term Asperger's wasn't used or wasn't in the in the medical kind of diagnosing stuff until 1998. So if you think about how long it takes stuff to end up being written about, and then for the doctors and all the practitioners to start learning about it, and then for those practitioners to be perhaps holding workshops for teachers to attend, and then those teachers learn it, you're thinking of a number of years there where that takes to take place for before you actually have it that you're likely to have teachers who are starting to understand or have experience with it. Yeah, if you've got obvious behaviors, it is much easier to get diagnosed sooner. Um, but also, the other one, as I've sort of mentioned in here, is that because I didn't have those obvious behaviors, because I was even if you don't have obvious behaviors, if you are a nuisance to people, you're more likely to get a diagnosis because there is a problem and others want it fixed because you are a problem to them. And so that's why it gets fixed sooner. Whereas if you're the quiet child who meets the criteria because you don't kind of engage in you don't really have the social skills, etc. You don't have those communication skills, but how it's expressed for you is that you just shut up and don't talk to anyone. If you shut up and don't talk to anyone and you're in classrooms, you're not causing anyone a problem. Whereas if something doesn't go your way and you start smashing things up and throwing chairs and tables around, people instantly get professionals involved and want you fixed somehow so that they can get rid of the problem to them. So it's always about, is this person a problem to sort of the teachers or whatever? And if they are, or to whoever it happens to be, is it a problem to that person rather than it's not so much about the needs of the individual who really needs the assessments. But yeah, I was always told that I was just weird. I'd walk around with magic books and things in school, and everyone else is trying to focus on football and stuff, and I'm there reading books on how to do rope tricks and things, and carrying the book around with me. And obviously, if you want to be a target for bullies, walk around carrying books all the time that are not remotely related to things you're being forced to carry around by school. Um, and yeah, I think weird is good. Darren Brown obviously talks about that in his documentary, Behind the Mischief. He talks about how it's the weird kids who go on to have successful careers and creative careers and things like that, and often become actors and artists and musicians and dancers and authors, all these sort of things. And it's often the people who spent all of their time acting cool and not doing their schoolwork and bullying and all stuff like that, who largely end up in the kind of more dead end type jobs. So it's obviously not an across the board generalization, but it is slightly more common that if you're essentially an individual, then you end up with more of an individual path. And I think I probably talk about it in here in a minute, but as an example, hello, Katharina. As an example, if when I we had to do work experience, all the other kids went and you have to approach a business and say, look, I need to do a week's worth of work experience. Will you hire me to do that? It's free. I'm a free school kid. Will you hire me to do some work experience? And every other kid went and approached shops and banks and things like that. I thought, I get a week off school. What do I want to do during that week? I want to go scuba diving. I love sharks. I love dolphins. I love nature. I want to go scuba diving. So I found a scuba diving company and I went up and said, do you want some free labor for a week? Um, it's work experience. I'll do whatever you want, um, as long as I can come out diving. And a diving company said, yeah, that's fine. Come and do that. So all the other kids went and stood in banks and made cups of tea for the people in banks and stuff. I went out scuba diving and did night dives and did uh, sort of going out on the river and all sorts of different bits and pieces. And even uh, then, when it got, I even then sort of put my name forward to do the open water dive qualification and went and did that. Um, and I did it when I went back to school. When you're writing it all up, and you have to then say, "What did you do for your work experience?" And they're all saying these incredibly boring things, and I said I went scuba diving every day. Um, and it was like no one else had thought to do that. So being the weird kid meant I did stuff that I wanted to do. Everyone else just did what they thought they're supposed to do. Fortunately, I didn't have a family that kind of, some people said, oh, well, you know, my dad said I've got to follow in the family business of going into accounting or whatever. For me, it was a case of, I didn't have that problem. I got to do what I wanted to do. And people were happy with me for doing that. Um, yeah, scuba diving is very nice. I like getting into as many of my stories as I can, ideally, but I'm aware not everyone likes diving. No, I always, whenever I was given work, like an actual assignment or something to do that I had decided to do, so that's the big thing. I have to decide to do it. Um, I would do it on day one. It would confuse me that people would leave it till the end. I would think, how on earth do you cope with yourself leaving it to the end? Doesn't it make more sense that if you're told you need to write this 5,000 word essay, that you say, okay, tonight when I get home, I'm going to write the 5,000 word essay, and then you do it and it's over and done with. And then you carry on doing whatever you want for the rest of the time. To me, that makes more sense. It makes less sense to think you've got, say, 6 weeks to do it in, and then in 5 weeks and 5.5 weeks time, you start doing it, and then you realize that you don't have enough time to do it in, and then you feel all stressed and anxious, and that just makes no sense. So I just think I'm going to do it as quick as I can, sort of as early as I can, because I want it out the way. Um, and this has kind of always been my problem. I talked the other week about um, signing up to a master's degree, and it was a home study one with a university, UK university. And I found it so ridiculously slow. I just couldn't keep doing it because I would complete everything I had to do within an hour on the day that on within the first hour of the lesson dropping online, and the next person to complete something would be doing it at the end of the week on the Sunday night, late at night. And this would really annoy me because then I couldn't do all the interactive parts that you're told you must do, like interacting in the forums with the other students, where it will say, discuss in the forums about this topic and, share your arguments about why you think this is right or wrong or whatever. And no one would post all week. And then everyone would post all at 11 o'clock on Sunday night. And I would think, I'm not staying awake at 11 o'clock on Sunday night to post in the forums. I want to post, I want it all done Monday morning, not at the end of the week. So I've always had that kind of mindset that I just do everything at the beginning and I don't do everything at the end. It's just so much less stressful that way. Hello, Holly. Yeah, I'd love to see a whale shark. That'd be cool. And unfortunately, I've not had an opportunity to scuba dive ever since being a child. The opportunity's never ever presented itself again. Um, but it would be good. Um, Hello, Chris. Thank you. Cauliflower cheese and Yorkshire puddings. So yeah, so I was just about to get on to. I thought it said black and white drinking. About how I'm not rude to people. That's what I like to think. So I can't remember if I've read that. No, I haven't read that. Right. I always tell myself that I'm never rude with people. I'm just open and honest. But I do know a girl in school who repeatedly asked me out. Oh, we just asked about this. I kept saying no to her, and eventually she asked me why. I told her that it was because she was ugly. I'm aware now that she probably got upset because of this, yet to me, this was just my opinion, and it was the honest answer to her question. My wife often tells me that the way that I am when I'm open and honest and blunt about things can come across as rude, even if it's in my head, and even if in my head I'm not meaning to be rude. To me, if they decide to take what I've said as rude, then that was their choice. They're given what I have said that meaning. I was comfortable being honest with teachers if they asked me a question. I never shouted at teachers or anyone else, as far as I'm aware. I think I've only shouted when I've been getting people's attention, but never aggressively. And I've had no problem being honest with other students. I've always had an issue with black and white thinking. I didn't know that phrase when I was a child, and I don't think I was aware of that. I was aware that I had black and white thinking. Everything would be all or nothing. If anything changed, that was the point at which I would stop and completely give up. I've already mentioned a road running race and refusing to run it at all. A couple of years later, I was in a race along the seafront at Littlehampton. We were told what the route was, straight along the seafront from the start line to a specific location where we would turn around and run back again, crossing the start line from the opposite direction. I started fine. I ran to the checkpoint and started heading back the way I came. When I was about half a mile or less from the finish line, there was a marshal stood at the location where the road which runs alongside the seafront turned inland. He said the route had been altered, so we had to run down the road, then turn off the road. So we had to run down this road, then turn off into a road which turns left, back parallel to the seafront. Then we would take a turning again, run up the River Arun before turning left again and crossing the start-finish line in the same direction as we'd originally crossed it. I immediately stopped running. As soon as I was told that the route had changed, I had no interest in completing the race, so I just walked back to the finish line. As far as I was concerned, I was supposed to do one thing, and I was doing that thing. I hadn't agreed to do something else, so I wasn't going to do it. As well as black and white thinking, I can be stubborn, even if I'm the one who will suffer through my own stubbornness. These are traits that I've always tried and failed to address throughout my life. The area where my behavior becomes most extreme socially are where something is about to be very uncomfortable for me. I don't like being touched. I'm better able to handle it nowadays, but I definitely wasn't good at being touched when I was younger. I hated feeling trapped by people. So I was comfortable climbing into the trunk of an old tree, or squeezing my body down into a small hole in the ground, or being tightly wrapped in blankets in a bed. But if children grabbed me to give me the bumps, or jumped on me while I was on the ground, then as soon as I felt I couldn't get out effortlessly, I'd do whatever I had to do to get free. It was of no interest to me whether the people holding me got hurt or not. They chose their behaviours. So if their choice of behavior led to them getting hurt, well, that was their decision. I always got free when children tried to bundle me or give me the bumps. I didn't care whether these children were my friends or not. I would say I didn't want something to happen, and if it did, I would do whatever I had to do to end the situation. Many stories I've heard from parents with children with autism describe this happening to their children. I can hear the stories and notice that the child didn't do anything wrong as far as I was concerned, as far as they were concerned. They weren't trying to be aggressive or horrible, or even violent. They were just trying to escape a situation that made them feel uncomfortable. And they were willing to do whatever they had to do in that situation to make sure that they felt comfortable. Often, other adults, both professionals and parents, focus on the behavior and the meaning that they give to someone choosing to do that kind of behavior, rather than focusing on the meaning the child gives to the behavior. Unfortunately, many children don't know why they do the behaviors that they do. As a teenager, if someone asked me why I behaved in that way, I don't think I would have known the answer to be able to give them. Most adults would probably phrase the questions to me as if I had done something wrong, which from my perspective wouldn't be correct. I'd probably be confused, wondering what they'd meant. Like in primary school, when I was confused about the implication that I had been the cause of the fight in the playground. I think it's important to talk to children with autism about what they did and explore what they can do differently next time, but not necessarily to place your own interpretations and judgments on their actions. The child may not be able to understand at the specific point in their life. So, insight being given to the child isn't necessarily the best response. But as a parent or professional, that insight can be helpful to you to understand the child better and to understand how they may behave in the future, or even to develop ideas which can help the child find ways of managing situations differently. As an adult, I'm the same person I was as a child. I don't feel any different. And I don't know if friends went And I know if friends went to grab me and give me the bumps because it was my birthday, I would do whatever I had to do to prevent that, even if it meant seriously hurting my friends. I wouldn't give it a second thought in that moment. My only thoughts would be on making sure that I remained safe and comfortable. But what I do now, which I never would have thought to do as a child, is to make sure I'm open about myself and make sure friends know this about me. Then if they were to grab me, I'd warn them that I didn't want to be grabbed, to give them a chance to change their minds. I used to tell people in school I didn't want them to do things like this, but in school, children don't listen, and they try to do it anyway. If they decided to continue with their behaviours, then as far as I was concerned, they were making that decision in the knowledge that I would get as aggressive as needed to be able to make myself comfortable. Luckily, no one since my school days has tried to give me the bumps or bundle me, although it has occasionally been talked about by friends in the part at that point. Has been talked about by friends, and at that point, I've made it clear it would be a bad idea. Sometimes having black and white thinking would lead to me making odd decisions. I remember being thirsty one day. I wanted something to drink. There wasn't anywhere to get free drinking water, and break time had ended. Someone I knew had a can of Lucozade Sport. I asked if I could have some. He said I could if I paid him £5. So that's what I did. I didn't care how much the drink cost. I would have agreed to any price to get the drink because I wanted it, and it was important to me in that moment to have a drink. I think I used to drive my friends away as a teenager because I would talk endlessly about my interests. I wouldn't talk about others' interests unless it was a shared interest. I couldn't understand why anyone would want to talk about anything I wasn't interested in. I'd gravitate towards people who shared the same interests. I would talk to my uncle about magic, any chance I got, for instance. I would talk to my science teachers about science and would want to stay after the lesson ended to be able to talk about what I was interested in about science, which usually wasn't the same thing that I was being taught in school. In fact, I often wanted to talk to teachers more than my friends to me. more than my friends. To me, they were the ones who were supposed to be interested and knowledgeable in those subjects. I'd often be late meeting up with friends at break and lunchtime because I'd be trying to talk to the teacher if my last class happened to be a subject that I was interested in. Science always fascinated me. I wanted to know everything. I wanted to fill my head with all the knowledge I could. Science was a subject about understanding everything. I started buying science magazines, including the first ever issue of Focus, now BBC Focus, of which I now have every single copy since it first came out, which is still true. I started reading many different science magazines, and my grandparents subscribed to weekly children's science titles for me. I loved reading them, but quickly found science articles had more depth in magazines like New Scientist and Scientific American, both of which I have collected ever since school. Science seemed to be all about problem solving, and there was always something unknown to learn. It was such a broad topic. There's nothing more exciting than the first time you you cut an onion and put it under a microscope and see the individual cells and the different parts of the cell. And then at night, looking up at Saturn through a telescope, seeing the rings and moons and becoming absorbed in what you can see. The slight wobbling seems to almost draw you in more. It looks like it's all slowly moving, as if you're in space, drifting and floating quietly towards the planet. Science opened up questions and possibilities and stimulated my mind to think about different inventions and ideas. As an adult who's worked with school teachers a lot in my professional work, I can see how this could have been most annoying for the teachers. They were probably looking forward to the breaks as much as the children. They probably had phone calls to make and other jobs to do that I was keeping them from. But as a teenager, none of that crossed my mind. I'll happily forgo meals to talk about my interests. I assumed teachers loved the subject that they were teaching. I never thought people became teachers because they wanted to teach. I thought it would be because they wanted to talk about the subject all day, every day. So, as my teenage self, I'd want a teacher to talk to me all break time on the subject I asked them about. Teachers were definitely more polite than other children. Friends would eventually tell me to stop talking about things so much, whereas teachers would listen and look back on them, would listen. And looking back on the memories, I suspect they were just politely waiting for a moment to say that they would have loved to be able to keep talking to me, but they have to go somewhere. As a teenager, I was never very good at noticing when people were bored or losing interest in what I was saying. One difficulty with being interested in subjects like science was that I would give answers that were correct, but I'd be told that they're wrong. During a mock science exam, there was a question asking what gravity was. I answered that it was the warping of space and time, or space time. I was told this was incorrect. I showed the science teacher one of my science books where it talked about gravity in this way, and she responded that the answer I gave would be correct if I was doing a higher level qualification, but not a GCSE answer. Another difficulty was that teachers would say things they didn't necessarily expect students to follow through with. A maths teacher said in the last maths lesson before half term that he'd give £500 to anyone who could write down the 12th perfect number. He then explained to us what perfect numbers were and how to work them out, and told us the first few perfect numbers. The numbers got very large very quickly, so I used long multiplication and worked out all 12 perfect numbers. Also, I found that there was a 13th number, but the 12th number was so big, I decided to stop where I'd reached. When I went back into school, I told the teacher I'd found a 13th number, but didn't work it all out. He told me he wouldn't give me the £500 as I didn't work out all of the perfect numbers, once I'd found that there were more. I was very annoyed about this. My mum was also annoyed, as I'd spent hours on this and had achieved what he had asked. My mum challenged him, but he still refused to pay out. I used to have really messy handwriting. It's still often very messy, and sometimes even too messy for me to understand what I've written. Being left-handed, I'd smudge my work as I wrote, because my hand would follow the writing. In primary school, my work was often had comments on it about the fact that I was using my left hand to write. By secondary school, people didn't seem bothered that I was left-handed. But it does have its challenges, and no one teaches you how to do things left-handed. I learned that I wrote neater if I tilted my paper sideways, so that I was writing downwards instead of across. This stopped my hand from following my work and smudging what I'd just written. Some teachers would regularly criticize my handwriting. So I was always trying out different styles of handwriting that I saw other children doing and tried to replicate neat handwriting styles, whether they were by other students or I'd seen them in books. Some teachers would tell me to write properly and straighten up my paper, but this was exactly what led to my writing being more messy and smudged. I tried to learn calligraphy outside of school. I thought calligraphy looked nice and may have also helped me to learn to write neater. Turns out that I encountered an issue straight away. Calligraphy requires a pen with a wide nib which is slightly angled. This angle is in the wrong place for left-handed people, so you just end up scratching away at the paper. My nan purchased me a left-handed calligraphy pen to use, which was much easier. I liked doing calligraphy, but it wasn't very practical for school, so I only went through a short phase of doing all of my schoolwork in calligraphy writing. I tried writing with the letters slanting left, with the letters slanting right. I found that slanting the letters left helped my hand stay out of the way more. I also tried bubble writing, which most other children seem to do. I didn't like this. It looked too chaotic to me. Teachers criticized my writing, but I actually found the patterns of my writing relaxing. I like the proportions of white space on the page to text and the placing of where the white space was. I liked angles of the different letters, or just the overall look of the text as a whole. It wasn't always readable, but I liked how it looked. Some teachers complained so much that I started being awkward with my writing in their lessons. I'd sometimes write really small. I was able to fit about 130 words on a single line. I liked doing this because I would become absorbed in focusing on writing each letter so small. It would feel pleasurable in that state where I was focusing and writing like that. Other times I'd write everything backwards, doing mirror writing, and sometimes I'd write with both hands at the same time, with one hand writing backwards and one writing forwards. My attitude was that I was asked to write a piece of work and I wrote it. If the teacher couldn't read it, that wasn't my problem. I did what I was asked to do. This didn't always go down well with the teachers, but at least when they now complained about my writing and not being able to read it, I felt they at least had something to complain about. Dating was another issue in school. I generally had very little interest in people in school for any reason, whether as friends or girlfriends. I was far more interested in subjects than people. Children went out with each other in primary school, but I didn't have any interest in doing this. And for the first few years in secondary school, I continued having no interest in going out with anyone. Then one year, something odd happened. It turns out that for some reason, people don't like asking other people out. They'd prefer someone else to do it, so I asked out a girl for one of my friends. She said no. I asked her out again for another one of my friends. She said no. And then another friend again, she said no. Then I thought to myself, actually, I quite like her. Why don't I ask if she'll go out with me? I couldn't understand why others wouldn't ask people out themselves. All you have to do is walk up to someone, ask them out, they give an answer, and it was this bit I needed to plan for. When asking her out for everyone else, it was easy. I'd walk up to her, I'd say, so and so would like to go out with you. And she'd then say yes or no, at which point I'd walk back to my friends and I'd tell them the answer. This was a clear structure I could follow and understand. If I asked her out for myself and she said no, what would I do? Just say okay and walk away? Where did I need to go to justify just walking away? Should I stay and continue to talk with her? What would we talk about? Likewise, if she said yes, what was I supposed to do? I'd then be suddenly going out with this person. Was I supposed to act or behave in a specific way? In the end, I thought of a solution. I decided to ask her out just before the bell went at the end of lunch break. That way, if she said yes, I had a planned action. The bell would go, so I would quickly agree to meet up next and then leave. If she said no, the bell would go, and I would say okay, and then I'd have to go because the bell has just sounded. I waited until the bell was just about to ring, went over to the girl and asked her out. She said yes. Then the bell went. The odd thing was, all of a sudden, I wanted to say, I wanted to stay. I'd planned, as I always do, exactly how things should go and how I should react. And yet, in the moment, I didn't want to react as I'd planned. It wasn't a long relationship. I think I was only superficially in it. I wanted to have the relationship and wanted to do everything right, but I was still following programs. I was I was still following programs I was creating in my mind based on stereotypes of what I thought I was supposed to do in that situation. I was kind, caring, supportive. I put her first, but I was also cold, not understanding the emotional and physical components of the relationship or how important these bits are to others just because they weren't to me. I remember the relationship ending after a few weeks. Nothing bad had happened. I mean, we hadn't argued or fallen out, but I could easily completely forget about the other person. I'd be somewhere with them and become occupied in my own interests and pay no attention to them at all. We were at a local youth club when a teen approached me around the side of the club, pinned me to a wall aggressively, and told me that she was now his girlfriend. I was to keep away from her or else he would sort me out. I remember all I could muster in response was okay. Then I moved on and didn't think anything of it. I never saw her again. I didn't think to find her and ask her about the relationship, about her feelings, about what she wanted. I just accepted what I was told and moved on unquestioningly. Following that relationship, I remember going through a stage where a number of different girls seemed to want to go out with me from the year below mine. I briefly went out with a few of them, but each relationship only lasted a day or two. I had no real interest in them. I don't think I was the boyfriend they hoped I would be. I don't think I showed the level of affection that they would have liked. And I had very little interest in conversing with them. I remember some very good times, like lying under the stars with a girl and just gazing up at the sky, and going to warning camp and going on swings myself and a friend had built years earlier. Eventually, I ended up in a couple of relationships with people from my own year in school. The first of these ended with us deciding we weren't really suited for each other. The second, the girl was too clingy for me. One day I told her I didn't want to see her that day. The fair was on and I wanted to go to the fair. I met some friends. I met some friends to go to, went on the rides, and the girl turned up. I told her I was there with my friends and carried on going on different rides. What I didn't know at the time was that she had gone back to my house and told my parents that I'd left her to walk home on her own. They took her home, but were angry with me when I came home. They told me I shouldn't leave a girl to walk home on her own. As far as I was concerned, she had decided to walk to the fair on her own, thinking that no one would be meeting her there and no one would be walking her home afterwards. It was her choice to have to walk home alone. As a general rule, I would never have someone walk home alone. But back then, I wouldn't stop what I was doing to walk someone home. At the time, when she approached me at the fair, I didn't think about how she'd got there or how she was going to get home. All I thought about was how I wasn't going to spend time with her because I had told her I wasn't seeing her that evening. It wasn't long after this that our relationship ended. I couldn't handle someone who always wanted to be around me. I wanted someone there when I wanted to spend time with them and have them leave me alone when I wanted to do my own thing. Writing this now, I feel like I'm portraying myself as arrogant and self centered, but that definitely isn't how I would have seen or described myself. But it may have been how I came across at times. One thing that used to confuse me when I was a teenager, and still does today, was my recognition or lack of it of people. I knew people in school, and yet if I saw them out of school where I wasn't necessarily expecting to see them, an out of school uniform, I wouldn't recognize them, even if they spoke to me. Yet there are other times when I could recognize them without them saying a word. I seem to do better recognizing people when I could see them walking than when I was face to face with them, interacting with them. There was a time I came home with my mum and brothers, and a friend of mine was waiting for me outside the house. It was during the summer holidays, so he wasn't in school uniform. He also hadn't shaved, and so had some stubble. I don't think until that point I'd realised how often this friend needed to shave. As I got out the car, he started speaking to me. I had no idea what he was saying because I didn't think I knew him, so I wasn't paying any attention to him. I smiled politely and walked straight past him. He continued to talk to me and followed me down the drive towards the front door. I continued to pay no attention to him. Then one of my brothers, who had just got out the car, started talking to him and engaging him in conversation. I suddenly recognized him when I looked at the two of them talking. At this point, I engaged in conversation, as if I'd known who he was the whole time. I didn't want him to think I was weird in some way for not knowing my own friend, whom I saw every single day at school. I still get this as an adult, where I don't recognize people I know very well. At home, I had three younger brothers, but I didn't feel like I went out of my way to engage with any of them, unless I was babysitting, where I would play the role of looking after them, like a babysitter would. In that situation, I did what was expected of me, but the focus for me was always on what I wanted to do. So when I was a teenager babysitting, the main thing I wanted to do was to go swimming with my brothers, not because I thought they would enjoy swimming, but because that was what I wanted to do. Luckily, I think they did enjoy going swimming. This would be something we would do almost every day of the summer holidays. Mum would give me £5 to babysit my brothers for the day, and I'd spend it all on four of us going to Arundel Outdoor Swimming Pool and get some chips and share for lunch. If I had enough left over, I'd buy myself a Nintendo magazine to read by the pool. As a teenager, my bedroom often looked untidy. It was a mess in some ways, but well organised in other ways. I liked things to be tidy, but had a different view of tidiness to my parents. I didn't particularly care if clothes were on the floor, but I liked things where I could find them and in my order. So books were stacked how I wanted them, everything had its place. I also felt my room, which wasn't exactly that large, was too big for me. It didn't feel enclosed enough, so I had my bed with its side against the wall and the head of the bed under the window. Then I put a chest of drawers at the end of the bed and with things stacked up high on it, and a wardrobe against the side of the bed with things stacked on top of it. I only left a small gap to squeeze through and had a computer desk with a TV, video recorder, and other things stacked on it, so that the space I had was now just the size of a single bed. I had black curtains to keep the light out. I liked being in the dark. I liked making dens that I could hide in and would often crawl under my bed as it was even more comfortable than being on it, even with all my furniture blocking out the rest of the room. So, I'll stop there for now. Who's annoying? Why is people annoying? Panda faces. Just scrolling back to see what's been written. Oh, I like big telescopes. Yeah, black and white thinking is essentially all or nothing thinking. It's things are either one thing or another. There is no grey. There's no kind of in between. Um, Scrolling down. Just reading your comments. Yeah, so for the last Yeah, I think it was just yesterday and today I've been reading chunks of my book, um, and then obviously engaging in whatever the comments are over here. Um, yeah, my handwriting's like spiders crawling over it. I was always told that. The best way to make sure you keep having messy handwriting. And tomorrow I'll be reading a bit about whatever it is I said in my thumbnail for tomorrow. Can't even remember what I've said for tomorrow. Um, oh, the thing that transformed my life. That's the bit for tomorrow. Reading about the thing that taught me all about communication skills and stuff. Yeah, I find it incredibly difficult to deal with social nuances and conversation timing and all those sort of things. As my best friend described me on my wedding day, I'm a socially inept neurolinguist. The girlfriend in my book is annoying. That girlfriend was annoying. But at the same time, I should still do the right thing. I should have known what the right thing was to do. And yeah, I miss lots of things as well. Um, yeah, I have enough trouble with one language, let alone more than one. Um, I'm just seeing what I've got left up until the bit that I'm on tomorrow. Nice, that starts there. So I can either read a little bit more, which takes us up to where I'm going to be talking about tomorrow, or you can ask questions or whatever over here. No, I don't have any cold coffee today. I didn't even have. I drank coffee before coming into this room and sitting here to make sure that I didn't have to try and sneak drinks of coffee. Yeah, Abby preferred that photo. She chose the other image and then decided when she saw it on the thumbnail that she wanted a different one. So um, we changed to a different image. Yep, I said, give me an image you want me to use. But obviously, until you see it on a thumbnail, you don't know 100% how it's going to look or whether you're going to be happy with it. So once she saw it, she wanted it a different one. So she gave me a different one. And I then just this morning swapped it over, that image over, because it's no trouble. It is, and I'm sure she'll be very happy to hear that. And it was the first time I've tried out Canva's background removal option. It works incredibly well, much better than when I've used Photoshop. All the photo editing softwares I use that have like the auto background removal, where you've got like, if I was to try and remove myself from this background in a photo, end up doing a really bad job of it, and they kind of would get like, oh, those books maybe match my hair, so let's get those books in it and all that rubbish. And yet Canva's photo background removal thing you just press one button and it seems to do it a really good job of it. Um, Although I only have an example of two, so it might turn out that when I've done like 100 photos, I might disagree with myself. Um, and obviously, thank you all for joining me over here, by the way. Just in case I haven't said that, I am obviously very grateful for you guys jumping in and joining me, given that all you get is to stare at my face um, for this. Talk more about why I decided to date when I generally avoid people. Um, I've never gone out of my way to date. So apart from that one example I just gave and Abby, I have never ever gone out of my way to actually date someone. Um, thank you. So that person, I think it was because I was asking her out for everyone else, and she came across really nice and friendly. Um, and yeah, and so I just suddenly thought, hang on, I'm happy to. I'd like more conversation with her. I'd be happy to kind of spend time with her, and so that's why I kind of asked her out. But when it came to anyone else, so the other girls in school, I never asked any of them out. The ones in the year below, just for whatever bizarre reason, um, wanted to come and ask me out. I would then sort of just either say no, and as I had talked, one of them who'd asked me out and I kept repeatedly saying no to, I ended up telling her why. But the others, the ones who I'd said yes to, we'd go out for a couple of days, and they'd end up getting bored because I would want to lie down on the grass staring at the stars, talking about space and astronomy, or I'd want to go to the woods and be among nature. I had very little interest in them as people. I wanted, if they want, I was happy to go out with them, but they had to then want to do all the stuff I wanted to do, spend all their time with me doing my interests, really. Um, that went pretty much for everyone when I was in school years. Then I ended up reaching a point of working in a holiday camp, working at Butlins. I ended up meeting my first wife at Butlins. I didn't set out to go out with her as such. It kind of happened that one day someone was calling her names, saying that she had chicken legs or something like that. I can't remember. And I happened to be walking past and told them to stop being horrible. She has very nice legs. And apparently that then makes people like you when you give them compliments. So I wasn't thinking anything of the compliment. But we ended up kind of getting on, and she was a nice friendly person and what have you, and we ended up going out with each other and then ended up getting married. And then with Abby, someone was I had kind of forced socialization put up on me. After my first marriage ended, my best friend's view was, you must go back out, go to pubs, go get drunk, meet women, all these sort of things. My view was, I have absolutely no interest in this thing you're talking about. What's wrong with sitting in my flat with all the curtains shut on my own? And his thing was, no, you'll be bottling it up, it'll eat away at you, etc., etc., etc. And he's got that kind of, I don't know, probably a normal perception, but what I took as a weird perception. And so I ended up going with him to the pub. ended up meeting his drama friends. It turned out that his drama friends, one of them knew Abby, and the uh, one of his friends kept on wanting to go out with me and kept on kind of wanting to hug me and all these unusual sorts of things that people want to do. And so I ended up kind of being very honest that I didn't like her like that. She seemed like a nice enough woman, but I had no interest like that. And then one day, she was very persistent. And then one day I was playing pool with one of the kids from the care home I was working in, supporting children, teenagers. And she brought Abby along to show Abby who this boy is that, this man is that she likes. And so, and I instantly just saw Abby, and for whatever reason, I thought I want to go out with her. So I said to this person, "Who is your friend? What is her number? I want to go out with her." And so I then kept asking Abby if she'll go out with me. Abby kept saying no, because you don't do that to friends. She knew her friend wanted to go out with me. I said, "But I've told your friend I don't want to go out with her, so that's not an issue. That's a ridiculous reason." And kept on saying, "But I want to go out with you. I want to go out with you." And then we ended up going out. And I think it was because she came across as really calm, really kind. She wasn't overwhelming. She didn't try and hug me as soon as she saw me or anything like that. Although Abby does point out that she could tell that I had feelings for her, because when everyone did the stupid kind of, "Oh, let's all hug" kind of weird thing that people seem to do, I would just kind of be receptive to it because it's what socially is going on, but then would hug Abby as part of that, and would hug Abby for longer. And yeah, and so then we ended up going out at that point, and have obviously been together for a long time since. Um, and just trying to scroll back, I think there's bits I've not seen. Yeah, so it was never a I decided to date, or there was no decision making really in it. It was, I saw this person who I thought I want to go out with her. So it was kind of that. There wasn't like a decided to date as in I've decided to go and find someone. It was in that exact moment in time I saw someone who I thought I want to go out with her, and that was it. Had I not seen Abby, I wouldn't have. I've never gone looking for someone to go out with or anything like that. If I hadn't seen Abby, I wouldn't have. I might not be with anyone now. I don't know. Don't know how things would have turned out. Tomorrow, I well, there's a bit of two things. One thing, tomorrow is when I'm going to cover. Um, I'll read the bit of my book where I talk about how I ended up discovering about body language and stuff, and the sort of event that transformed my life and made it so that I realised about social skills and all these sort of things. Um, I struggle with social connections still. I could walk away from pretty much everyone in my life, and wouldn't bat an eyelid. It's of no interest to me or consequence to me, whether that's family or whatever. Um, but so that's one thing. Tomorrow I'll be talking a lot more about that as the specific topic on here, because that's the next. That's sort of where I'm going in my book, is into what I've put in the thumbnail for tomorrow's topic, which is the event that transformed my life. Um, in relation to doing things like this, it's a completely different thing. And I spoke about this the other day, possibly 2 days ago. I don't think it was yesterday, about how there's a huge difference between socializing or being social and just relaying something the information of. Um, So I would often give talks about being autistic, whether it's to parenting groups, whether it's to a mix of like teachers and parents and all different and people who are autistic themselves and what have you. And eventually, someone would say to me, uh, "If you're autistic, how come you can stand up and give this talk in front of everyone? I know, my son wouldn't be able to do it," or whatever they end up saying. And I always kind of point out that there's a huge difference between me mixing and socializing with people and me giving information at people. So if I'm standing talking about things I know what I'm talking about, and I just follow bullet points, or I already just know the topic and so I can just answer it. Um, and there is an element of I've learned various skills as I've grown up as well from the sorts of things I've done, um, and also learned about things like what you can and can't control, and things like knowing that it's okay not to know things. And so if you're put on the spot and you don't know an answer, when you're teaching or presenting, it's perfectly acceptable to say, I don't know the answer to that. Likewise, in therapy, it's perfectly acceptable if a client puts you on the spot and tries to get an answer out of you. Says, what's the answer to this? Nearly every time, a therapist is lying if they know the answer, because if it was that easy that you just happen to know the answer, and it would instantly work, then you'd barely need therapy, because the therapist on the first session would just tell you the answer. Um, Things are normally, so even in therapy, easier to say than they are to do. You can know the answer in terms of academically. That doesn't mean that you know the answer in terms of how that individual in front of you would be able to implement that in a meaningful way in their life to make changes to their life that mean they don't have a problem. So doing things like YouTube, where I'm just talking at a camera, I struggle with the vlog type of thing. So I can't do here. I'm responding to content, and so I'm essentially, this is a question and answer. I see a question, I then answer it. Whereas a vlog of me walking around trying to say what I'm getting up to, I can't do that. I have no idea what to say. It doesn't flow or anything. Um, in relation to uh, doing things like sleep meditations, again, I'm just creating a video or an audio or something. I'm not having to have a dialogue. There's no socialness about it. In relation to this, I'm pretty much talking at a camera and reading questions and then answering those questions. And then from time to time, reminding myself that I'm supposed to be um, sociable to some extent and thanking people for joining me and things like that, because I won't necessarily have thought of that just spontaneously. I have to actively keep reminding myself, what is it that, how should I be portraying myself as a human being? Um, so, but I'm aware that there are a lot of people who are lonely, and my best kind of recommendation, if it's down to they're lonely because of not being able to socialize, not being able to create that connection, is to learn the patterns of whatever it is you're trying to learn, and to learn about nonverbal behavior, to learn about body language, and to really dedicate a lot of time to mastering those skills. And what kind of irritates me a bit from a lot of the work I've done, where it's been going into schools, and I've worked with teachers who apparently help autistic people, is that it's always done in a way that I think is ridiculously inefficient, and entirely, it's as if someone who has not autistic in the slightest, someone who's not autistic, is the one who came up with how to help autistic people, and that because they're not autistic, they've completely missed the point. And so you get things like showing smiley faces, like emojis, and then saying, here's an emoji for a happy person, here's an emoji for a sad person. And it's all like, when does any face ever look like a yellow circle with a line drawn on it? It just makes absolutely no sense at all. And so for me, it's like, you need to learn properly. You need to see real faces. You need to be taught genuinely about things like the face changing color, all these sort of things. I'll talk about this a lot more detail tomorrow. But you need to be taught about these sort of things, not taught to look at emojis and trying to work out what the emoji is, because an emoji isn't a real face or anything. Um, Likewise, you need to be taught about breathing. You need to be taught in relation to social stuff. You need to be taught about rapport. You need to be taught about active listening. So essentially, a lot of what I learned about learning about counseling is what has taught me about how to socialize, because counseling, you get taught about listening to someone talking, you get taught about active listening, reflective listening, and reflective kind of communication skills. You get taught about rapport. You get taught these sort of skills that you just never ever get taught as you grow up. And if you're autistic, those skills haven't necessarily come naturally to you. So you've got this stuff that you don't get taught, that stuff that everyone assumes you know, that you can actually go and learn because people do teach it. It's just that it's not taught to autistic people, unfortunately. So, and I remember a therapist years and years and years ago saying that dating is one of the easiest things. You walk up to someone, you say, hi, I'm so and so. So this is an adult. He says, if you reach adulthood and you struggle with dating, go into a venue, not somewhere where people are getting drunk. That's not the best place to find a lasting relationship. But assuming you're after companionship of a longer term, go into somewhere like if you're at somewhere that I don't know, an interest of yours, you go there and you walk up to people who you like. You say hi, and then you say your name. If they say hi, I'm so and so, and they reciprocate, then all you have to do is think of what are you going to say next. Like, so have a pattern for how you're going to start the conversation. Like, if they say hi, I'm so and so, are you going to say, have you come here before, or what's going to be you sort of get an idea of what's going to be your conversation starter piece afterwards. If they kind of dismiss you straight away and seem to think, and what of it? If I walked up and said, hi, I'm Dan, and they said, and think, oh, sorry, I thought you were someone else, and just walk off. And this person was saying, in terms of dating, that's all he would teach clients, is that if the person seems unresponsive to the fact you've approached them and they don't seem to want the conversation to go further and they dismiss you really quickly, just walk away. Just say, sorry, I thought you were someone else, and walk off. It doesn't, you don't know them, they don't know you, it doesn't matter. So it is about finding what is that kind of way in. What's the pattern for it? Like job interviews. I know a lot of autistic people who I've had to help around job interviews because they've got stuck thinking, I don't know how to go for a job, how to do an interview. And part of it is that no one has ever actually taught them how an interview works. Once you know how an interview works, you can learn. For example, say you've got a panel of people interviewing you. Person one asks you a question, you answer it. As you answer it, you look at person one to start answering it. While you're answering it, you look at person two, person three, person four, whatever. As you finish answering it, you look back at person one. So you have that pattern of, when I'm asked a question, this is how I'm going to behave physically. When you're asked a question you don't know and you think, I have absolutely no idea what you mean by your question, then you say, would you be able to give me an example? And if they give you an example and it suddenly makes sense, which it often does once someone gives you an example, then you come up with an answer similar because now it makes sense. So you think, oh yeah, I've got an example like that as well. And so you can then answer. If they say, well, for example, if, and then they give you an example and you think it still makes no sense, then you just say that. If you don't get the job, you don't get the job. Part of it comes down to where you're focusing your attention. Like, I know there's that pressure to think I've got to get this job, but actually you do better being open and honest, and sometimes not getting jobs, but at least being open and honest. And if you've blagged your way into a job, if you've somehow managed to just get into a job through somehow misleading people or whatever, you're not going to last in the job anyway. So never mind how much you sort of think, if I go for this job, I've really got to try and get it. If you don't get it, it was probably a good thing because you probably weren't the right person for the job. And hopefully you've learned from the interview and you've learned what it was that was the issues that lost you the job. Um, so there are skills and patterns you can learn around things, but another part of it does come down to how much you want to achieve those things. For example, I know of a number of situations where there's been parents who, or other, or friends, or whatever, who've said so and so is lonely. They spend all their time alone, etc., etc., etc. But you go and talk to that individual. I had this in the town I live in, where some parent said, "Well, I work with their son. He's living at home. He never comes out his room. Never opens his curtains. He lives just in the dark, in a box, essentially." um, and he's obviously bitterly lonely, and that's probably why he can't come out of his box. He can't seem to socialize, can't get a girlfriend, etc., etc. When I met him, he was happy. He had his Doctor Who uh, DVD collection of all of the Doctor Who episodes, the old ones, not and the new ones, but the proper ones, not just the new ones. He had his computer. He was more than happy with his life. It was the parents who felt that that lifestyle of his must be an unhappy lifestyle. So I've also encountered that as well, where sometimes it's people projecting how they think the person must be feeling onto that person. But then likewise, I have had situations where the person themselves is saying, I would love to be able to socialize. I'd love a girlfriend or a boyfriend or whatever it happens to be. And then it's a case of, well, what skills do you need to learn to make that a possibility? What what sort of areas are you lacking, um, and what kind of girlfriend, boyfriend, whatever are you looking for, what kind of person, etc. And then you just explore it and you look at how you can help the person, like what situations will you find that type of boyfriend, girlfriend. And so there's a lot of just sort of education that goes on, and training and teaching and having them practice with you, um, until they kind of master the different skills. So what made Abby different? I've absolutely no idea. I just saw her, and the second I saw her stood next to her friend, I instantly thought, I want to go out with that girl. And I don't have any reason other than that. It was just an instant thought. Uh, Obviously, now I know Abby, I know she's a lot different to a lot of other people who I've met over my life. She doesn't like going out pubbing and clubbing, and doesn't like loud places, and likes things quiet and relaxed, and doesn't like things like football and sports and stuff. And so we complement each other a lot in those ways. Yeah, part of the reason I'm doing this, not this specifically for this week, although it is this as well, part of the reason I'm doing these live streams as frequently as I can, I'm going to aim try and do it every week, every day. But I might want some time off from time to time. I'm aware that I haven't watched Supergirl yet this week, because I'm here, and then it's too late when I'm done here. Is to try and keep people company, so to speak. To try and have it so that you're hearing someone else's voice, and hopefully you've got a bit of sanity. Well, I don't know if you have got sanity staring at me, but to try and help in some way, for those who might like it. So yeah, so it probably was hormones trumping autism. Probably one of the very rare occasions that that's happened. Um, yeah, I definitely understand the autism part far more than the other parts. Right, I think that was what I just answered, wasn't it? Yeah, just making sure. Yeah, unfortunately, Abby and myself don't have a pet, although we would really like a cat. Hello, Michelle, for dropping in. Nope, Abby was my second wife. I ended up with my first wife in 1997, I think, 1998, something like that. We got married on Valentine's Day 2001. We were separated by March 2001. We'd lived together for most of the time we were in a relationship together. Um, and I ended up with Abby not that long after we separated. Well, I met Abby not that long after we separated, and then we ended up in a relationship a few months later. I would love to invite Darren Brown on for a chat, but he most definitely wouldn't say yes to me. Because I thought that it would be. I really loved the idea of inviting Darren Brown on for a chat. I've thought about this a lot to try and think what I can do, not just for autism during Autism Awareness Week, but during the rest of the time that I'm live streaming. I thought, wouldn't it be cool to have like either a video uploaded to my channel or a live stream with Darren Brown talking about, sort of stoicism and focusing on what you can control versus what you can't control, and how that kind of mindset can help in our current circumstances. So obviously, feel free, anyone who wants to say, Darren Brown, go and get yourself interviewed on Dan Jones Hypnosis YouTube channel about stoicism, feel free to pester him. He would say no or ignore you, but I would love it if he said yes, and I'll probably pester him as well. You never know. Anyway, yes. So I do try and get through all the questions and answer things, but at the same time, the live chat does suddenly jump. So if I do miss something, like I would have missed that question if it wasn't for the bit saying, I hope he answers the question. And I thought, oh, I've obviously missed something. So yeah, commenting that I have missed something is helpful. And obviously, sometimes perhaps if you think, oh, Dan still seems to be constantly missing it, then even just like copying and pasting it, saying, Dan, you missed this, or have you answered this yet, or something might help. If it looks like, it doesn't look like I've missed it, then I'll obviously get to it. But yes, Mum described that from, unlike all her other children, her other three children, I was like a sack of potatoes from birth, that I never hugged back even instinctively as a baby, whereas all the other brothers did. And I sort of actively try to avoid hugging as much as I can. I think Abby's about the only person I hug. Some people do hug me on purpose just because they know it's annoying, but I actively try to avoid it. I doubt I would have been miserable without Abby, because I wouldn't have known Abby. But I would probably largely be alone, and I probably wouldn't be doing YouTube or anything. I'd probably be a hermit in the woods. Again, something else that my best friend described me as on my wedding day, that Abby stopped me being a smelly hermit. Yeah, I think it can be difficult because before I was diagnosed as autistic, it led to me not being able to say to people, look, actually, these behaviors are because I'm autistic. So there'd be an awful lot of misunderstanding. There'd be a lot of being told that I come across as arrogant and rude and self centered and all these things that I would never describe myself as a human being. And yet my behaviors would convey that kind of behavioral message to people. And So yeah, so it's very hard without a diagnosis, or without some level of you knowing for certainty that you are autistic, um, to sometimes kind of address those bits. Um, and I'm aware that that has been a problem through much of my life. Has been that lack of understanding of me as a person, because of the fact that even when I've thought I think I'm autistic before I was diagnosed, I wouldn't tell people that, because obviously no one likes a self-diagnoser. No one likes someone that says, "Oh, I'm a little bit OCD," or whatever it happens to be. You know, because then it kind of, if someone says that, that's the one that kind of grates on me the most, is where people say, "Oh, I'm a little bit OCD," and you think, no, if you had OCD, you would know about it. It's really, really horrible for the person with OCD, and they would do literally anything to stop being OCD. OCD isn't just a nice, like, well, I like straightening things a little bit occasionally. Um, so I've never wanted to be someone who kind of self-diagnoses and claims something that I don't have a medical professional telling me. Let's just scroll. Yeah, I struggle with. I'm very good with like certain as in situations that are certain, not certain as in some situations. I'm very good with certain situations with certainty in them. So if I know I'm going to walk into this room and this is going to happen and that's going to happen, I'm normally okay. I've planned for it. I know what's going to happen. It will go okay. If, on the other hand, suddenly someone reacts in a way that takes me by surprise, or it's unplanned, or anything like that, so nearly all interactions, then I need time to try and understand what's going on. That's where I normally give a stupid answer, that I think, "Oh, I can't." Afterwards, I might analyze what went on, and I think, "Oh, I can't believe I said that. I can't believe I answered in that way. I probably look so stupid," or whatever it happens to be. Um, but I need time. I need conversations and things to be really slowed down, and I struggle when it's like really fast paced and people are right in your face about it, about something, and um, it's too fast for me to keep up and too fast for my brain to process. I struggle as soon as you throw in multi-level communication. So people trying to, 1 minute they're having a laugh, 1 minute they're saying something, being sarcastic, and I don't know whether they're being sarcastic or not being sarcastic, because I haven't, even if I know them, I haven't got that kind of context. I haven't got the right, we need to stop this for a minute. I need to analyze the conversation up to now, try and work out whether I think that was a sarcastic comment or a real comment, or it all just gets so overwhelming. And as I think I can't remember if I've read that today or a previous time or talked about it previously. But what would be the easiest thing is to avoid mixing with people full stop, so that you don't have misunderstandings, you don't have the grief and the pain of having people suddenly having a go at you for something where you think, I didn't do anything wrong. Why am I having people suddenly lay into me and have a go at me and blame me for stuff when I've no idea what you're having a go at me and blaming me about? Why can't people just be nice and friendly and accepting and what have you? Rapport is, Darren Brown described it years ago as like a dance. So rapport is kind of that. Oh, I see that Sharon's answering it beneath. It's the kind of relationship between people. So rapport is, um, the sort of scientifically, you've got mirror neurons that trigger you to act like someone around you, or other people. So, or other behaviors you see happen. Um, so, for example, and rapport makes relationships feel closer, is another sort of part of it. So, for example, if you're sat with someone and they cross their arms in the middle of the conversation, so I'm going to go a bit broader now, because there's something about this that irritates me in relation to the training that you get if you go on rapport training that teaches about rapport skills. because there's training courses like when you go on some neurolinguistic programming training courses, they will teach this in terms of manipulation. And uh, they teach it kind of, for example, when they teach rapport, they'll say, match the person, match what the person does. So you've got matching and mirroring. So matching is you copy the same as them, mirroring is you become like a mirror image of them. So with matching, if they move their left arm, you might move your left arm. Mirroring, if they move their left arm, you might move your right arm, so that it's the mirror image of them. But they'll teach it as a manipulation thing. And anyone who has experienced someone who claims to be highly trained in something like NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, who does it in that highly manipulative kind of way, will know how bad it comes across. It doesn't come across as effective. It comes across like they're trying to manipulate you. And so, for example, if I'm talking with someone, so I can see myself in the screen here. So I'm acting now while I describe this as if I'm sat here opposite me. So if I'm talking to someone and that person goes, oh, yeah, it's a really good idea, actually. And as they go inside their mind, so you're watching for the pattern, as they go inside their mind, I think that's a really good idea. They just instinctively, for them, cross their arms. Then when it gets to my turn in the conversation, where they're now presenting something to me, they're talking to me about something, and they kind of say, I don't know, they say something that makes me go, oh, that's actually, yeah, I haven't thought about that. When I'm doing that, going inside my head, reflecting on what's just been said thing, like they did, then I would think, oh, yeah. And I might cross my arms so that I'm doing behavior similar to them. Now, for neurotypical people, I don't like that term, but it's the official term for people who are normal, if there is such a thing. So have normal wiring. That comes instinctively, that you which is why it's stupid having it taught as a manipulation thing, but it comes instinctively that when one person sort of does something. So for example, if two people like each other, if you watch in a pub or something, not that you'll be doing this lately, but if you watch in a pub or something and two people like each other, you'll notice that they both act like mirror images of each other. So they'll both lean into each other at the same kind of times. They'll both copy each other's, they'll fall into a sync with each other. They'll fall in sync with each other where it's like almost like a dance is taking place. So when one goes to drink, the other one will drink almost as soon as that one has had a drink. If one of them scratches their head, the other one almost straight away will end up scratching their head. So that's kind of rapport. They've naturally built that synchronized their behaviors with each other. They naturally synchronize their breathing with each other. And when you synchronize your breathing with someone, you synchronize your body posture and everything with someone, you both start feeling the same kind of feelings as each other because you're doing behaviorally the same things as each other. So that's kind of rapport, and it's driven by our mirror neurons, and the mirror neurons fire to say copy the behaviors that you see. So in fact, if you watch people playing tennis on TV, you are exercising, because while you watch people playing tennis, the muscles to do with what you're watching the people bounce around the court using make micro fires of impulses through your body as if you're playing tennis, even though you're sat on the sofa watching people play tennis. So so that's what rapport is. I felt it needed a bit more than just trying to explain the words, but a bit of an explanation. Job interviews, I used to think of them as difficult until I learned that there's patterns to these things. Once I learned that there was patterns, not even born in 1997. Oh, that's a scary thought. I keep saying I'm old, and people here keep saying that I'm not. But the more I see, the more I think I am. So with job interviews, once I started learning, and I'll talk about this more tomorrow, but once I started learning that there's patterns to all these different things, suddenly the whole world became a bit easier because all of a sudden I could notice um, patterns for how job interviews go. But I had to go through a number of job interviews to start to learn that there's patterns to job interviews. Just like, you have to sort of engage with a certain number of people or watch a certain number of people before you learn that there's patterns to how people interact with each other and how eye contact works and stuff like that. Um, yeah, so with the eye contact, I talk about this tomorrow. But with the eye contact, for example, my first uh, venture into the world of eye contact was counting to five, looking while I'm staring at someone, in not in their eyes, but through their head, and then counting to five, looking away from them, and then counting to five, looking at them again, and just keep doing that. And then I gradually refined it more as I learned more about how eye contact works and why people look at and away from each other. And watching the bill is a very good way of learning about eye contact. But I'll talk more about that tomorrow. Well, if Darren would join me for an interview, I would be more than happy to interview him about Stoicism. I don't have any other recommendations. I don't think specifically about PTSD. I can't remember if I uploaded a meditation PTSD track as well. I might have done because I've no, year before last, I think it was. I uploaded um, a bunch of my I sort of read a bunch of my meditations from my meditation book um, that I've got. I've got a book of meditation scripts, and I thought I'd just read a bunch of them for YouTube. And I can't. I've got one there for PTSD, but I can't remember if that was one I also read. Um, yeah, I get annoyed with people who do that. Come and get people to sit next to you and stuff. Um, yeah, I think it's also the training of therapists who aren't autistic is part of the problem. That the training, whoever it is that's devised how children should be taught how to recognize emotions and things in schools, whoever it is that decides on how you should work with autistic clients. For those of you who may have missed it, in my description, which isn't always below, depending on what device you're looking at, but the description for this video, I think there's the link to my working with autistic clients, understanding working with autistic clients e-course, where I kind of try and share what I can about the experience. And it's on special offer at the moment. So anyway, yeah, there's something about the fact that I don't think people consult autistic people enough when they're creating all these different training courses. They don't kind of say what would it be that would be helpful to you to learn and how would you learn that. There's lots of stuff that I would, if I was doing it, I would do things so different to how it's often done. Yeah, generally I find text and stuff easier. Um, I'm not so bad face to face at times. So where I have a problem is where it depends what it's about. So where I have a problem sometimes is where bits of communication are shut down. So for example, when I've done radio interviews, I find it incredibly difficult to do a radio interview over the phone, like I did the other day with the BBC. That was really hard to be on the end of a phone, being interviewed over the phone, because I couldn't see the person interviewing me. So I couldn't work out like the pausing and is it my turn to talk? Are you pausing because you're still listening? Are you about to say something? There's too much uncertainty. I don't really understand what's going on. So normally when I agree to do a radio interview, I will travel all the way to Brighton, where BBC Sussex and Surrey is, I'll say, look, I'll just come into your studio. I'll come in and be interviewed in your studio. And they'll say, no, no, we're happy to do it by phone. I say, no, I'd much rather come in and sit opposite the host and be interviewed face to face, because then I can see, yes, they're looking at me because they're watching and nodding. And, oh, yeah, you're answering, you're answering. Now they're going quiet because they're listening. Now, now they're talking. Now I can see they're about to say something. So I'm going to shut up to give them a chance to say something. Now I can see that they're showing that they want to wrap up this conversation because of their behavior. I can see that they're sort of teetering on the off button from my microphone, ready to say, thank you for coming in, etc., etc., etc. So that's Dan Jones. Where can people find out about you, more about you, etc.? And then I answer and they say thank you, and then they shut my microphone off and do their bit of speech, like, and after the news, next is the news, and after the news is whatever. I can see all that, whereas I can't pick all that up through my ears if I'm on the phone, and that makes me really uncomfortable, really nervous. And obviously, the more flooded with emotion I am, the more I'm likely to stumble on my words, make mistakes, etc. So there are some things where it's so much easier face to face, because you've then got all of that sensory input to work with, as long as you know what you're trying to look for. So if I didn't know what I was looking for, which I didn't as a teenager, that would all be pointless. Having that information, I wouldn't even know that information is there. But when you know it's there, then that then becomes easier. But then there are other times where I'd much rather just do things by text. So I almost never answer my telephone. In fact, I didn't answer my telephone to Paul McKenna because I didn't know who was phoning me. And Abby was saying to me, answer it. It could be important. It could be about your books or something. It could be I get phoned to be on the radio and stuff like that. And so it could be something like that. Nope, not going to answer it. And then I had picked up the answer phone message, and it's Paul McKenna. Hi, this is Paul McKenna here. I just want to phone and tell you I really loved your book, etc., etc., etc. And it's like, oh, I should have answered. But then if I'd answered, I wouldn't have an answer phone message. So swings and roundabouts. But yeah, so sometimes I much prefer to do things in text. I find that then everything's clearer. I've been able to lay down what I want to say, but then I still get people misunderstanding things, that I can suddenly sound really blunt in a text message, and I don't know they've taken it as me being blunt until I'm getting something really negative and harsh back. Whereas if I say it face to face and I get a response back that implies that I've just upset them, I can do something about it because I was actually there. So I might prefer to communicate in text, but the communication goes much better when it's face to face and in person nowadays. Yeah, I don't know about how many autistic therapists or not there are out there. Like people that openly say, we are a team of therapists who are autistic and therapists. It'd be very good if there was something out there like that, where it was open, saying this is what we are. Anyway, I'm going to round up soon, but I want to make it to the end of what people have written before I do. Yeah, there's also the thing of, obviously, something people misunderstand in relation to autism. I talk about it in one of my books. Is the idea that, for example, people will say, he obviously is like over affectionate and over huggy, and that seems to go against what a lot of autistic people perhaps describe. But my reason for my hugging kind of issue is the sensory side of it. But not every autistic person has the same kind of bunch of sensory challenges. You have some things that you're very sensitive to, some things that you're very unsensitive to, and things that you're normal sensitivity to. And that could be different for every single person. But in relation to the actual criteria for an autism diagnosis, it's things like having the social communication challenges, where it could be that the problem is actually you have no personal space. And I've actually met some autistic people that say, I don't know how I was diagnosed as autistic because I don't have all of the problems. I don't have a problem with socializing. I'm brilliant at socializing. And then you see them socializing and they're right in people's faces. They're constantly invading their personal space. They're wrapping their arms around people. They're asking completely inappropriate questions that are not appropriate for the kind of group of people they're talking with. And so they think I am socializing, so I don't have that problem. But you can, when you're an observer, you're watching and thinking you're not socializing as a person who's not autistic would be socializing. Um, and so it's kind of also trying to help people to understand that it's not all about like, not being close to people and things like that. Everyone's kind of different in how they express or sort of show themselves. So I'm determined to reach the bottom. Um, let's have a look. Yeah, I get surprised how many people like phone calls and seem to chat on the phone. But there are a lot of people who seem to also not like them. Because I would, for example, if I'm out, I won't answer my phone to Abby if I'm with people, and that has had Abby worry before, where she can't get hold of me, and it's perhaps midnight or something, and she thought I'd be home at 10, and I won't have told her that I'm just running late or whatever because I won't use my phone to contact her, and I won't answer my phone, which only adds to the worry and what have you. Um, and the same, I won't answer my phone to most friends unless I really think it's an emergency that I really must answer this phone call, and that the well-being of that person is more important than avoiding that phone call. And that if I don't answer it, then I might not have a chance to talk to them again for a very, very long time or something. Or maybe there's no way I can contact them. It's so hard to get hold of them that if I don't answer it, I may not be able to get hold of them again in the future. Um, and some phone calls I have no choice but to do. Like when I talked to the radio the other day, I had no choice. It was going to be by phone. I'm in a lockdown. There's no choice. It's got to be by phone if I want to help to try and raise autism awareness. So even with friends, I won't talk on the phone if I can avoid it. I'd rather text with those friends, ideally, and even that I won't do if it's in front of anyone. Yes, I plan on going in a minute as well. So thank you for joining us over here. I just don't like to go when I haven't made it to the bottom of the list. So yeah. So fortunately, everything at the bottom is people saying you're ready to go, which is good. So I will be back tomorrow, same time as I was today. Hopefully not going over 3 hours like I've done today. But tomorrow we'll be talking about those things that transformed my life. So a very active period of my life. So thank you again, all of you, for joining me. Give it a thumbs up if you found this helpful or interesting at all. Feel free to subscribe if you're not a subscriber and you think, oh, I'll listen to more of what Dan does and check out my sleep stuff or whatever, and all my other videos. And I will see you tomorrow. So thank you again all for joining me. Waving. See you later.